Okay, you're live.
Good evening, everyone. This is Chairman Cynthia Wenstrom. This is McDowell Sonoran Preserve Commission. It's October 14th, and we're calling this meeting to order. We're going to start with the roll call, please. Vice Chair LaPat Palasco.
LaPat Palasco here.
Commissioner Coluccio.
Coluccio here.
Commissioner Hackbarth.
Commissioner Hackbarth is here.
Commissioner Lips.
Commissioner Lips is here.
Commissioner Olson.
Commissioner Olson is here.
And Commissioner Smith.
Commissioner Smith is here.
And Chair Wenstrom is here. Public comments. I have none this evening. So we're going to move on to item number 4, approval of the minutes. This first group will be September 9th. We had 2 meetings close together, so we're approving 2 different meetings this evening. So to the commissioners, any questions, comments, changes, edits on what you're seeing for September 9th meeting minutes? No questions at all. Okay, then I will ask for a motion to accept as presented.
Commissioner Hackbarth makes a motion to accept September 9th minutes as written.
Thank you. And a second, please.
Commissioner Smith seconds it.
Thank you very much. That was Commissioner Hackbarth and Commissioner Smith. And then we will vote. We'll start with Vice Chair LaPat Palasco, please.
LaPat Palasco votes yes.
Commissioner Coluccio,
Coluccio votes yes.
Commissioner Hackbarth,
Hackbarth votes yes.
Commissioner Lips,
Commissioner Lips votes yes.
Commissioner Olson,
Commissioner Olson votes yes.
Commissioner Smith,
Commissioner Smith votes yes.
and Chair Wenstrom votes yes. Thank you. And we'll move on to the approval of the September 16th meeting minutes. Any questions, comments, edits from our commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Coluccio.
Hi, Commissioner Coluccio here. I do have a question for Scott. Are you the preserve manager or are you senior trails planner?
Reserve manager.
Okay, thank you. She referred to both here. I was wondering which one you are. Preserve manager under staff and under special use permit requests. Thank you for your clarification.
So we would change that then, correct? That would be an edit. Thank you, Commissioner Coluccio. Other question, comments, and edits? Yes, Commissioner Olson?
Commissioner Olson here. There was significant questions and conversation around questions, and I don't see any of that captured in the minutes. Do we not capture commissioner discussions?
These minutes are summary minutes from the standpoint that the meeting is recorded. And so you can always go back to the recording and get the details of that. But we do not do verbatim minutes and have not for many years.
It's not verbatim I'm looking for, but I mean, we spend significant time going through what was presented. Why don't we capture the essence of discussions?
And again, that they attempt to get a general sense of that. And if you have interest in more detail, the intent is that you go back and pull up the recorded minutes. And that's consistent with the manner that these minutes have been done.
I just don't feel this is conclusive or this is representative of the conversations.
They are not meant to be that level. And it does have to do with budgets and other things as well. That was the decision that was made many years ago.
So that is across the board for all commission and boards.
That's correct.
It's simply a summary. So if there is conversation from commissioners, then it is up to the person that's interested to go back and listen to that.
Yep.
Okay. Questions or comments beyond that? All right, I hear no edits at this time, no changes to September 16th meeting minutes as presented. So I will ask for a motion to approve as accepted.
LaPat Palasco makes a motion to approve the September 16th minutes.
Thank you. And a second, please.
Commissioner Lips will second.
Commissioner Lips. All right. So that was Vice Chair LaPat Palasco and Commissioner Lips. All right. And a vote, please, to approve as we have made no changes here. Excuse me. We did make one edit, which was changing Scott's title. So from Vice Chair Pat Palasco, please,
I vote to approve the minutes with the one change.
and Commissioner Coluccio,
Coluccio approves.
Commissioner Hackbar,
Commissioner Hackbarth votes yes.
Commissioner Lips,
Commissioner Lips votes yes.
Commissioner Olson,
Commissioner Olson votes no. I don't believe this represents the content of the meeting.
thank you. And Commissioner Smith,
Commissioner Smith votes yes.
and Chair Winstrom votes yes. Thank you. All right. We've approved the minutes. On to number 5, the McDowell Sonoran Conservancy update from Executive Director Justin Owen, please.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm happy to be here to provide the October update. And I will first start with our 30th anniversary celebrations. One of the things that I'm very happy to have accepted the proclamation from Mayor Ortega last week, proclaiming October McDowell Sonoran Preserve Month, honoring the amazing work of the Conservancy, our stewards, as well as this amazing commission. So it was an honor to accept that on behalf of the group. Fun part, also 27th anniversary of the preserve. So we're still a little bit older, but it's still in its 20s. So we'll be happy for its 30th coming up. In our history, in October of 1997, we held our 100th free hike following the dedication of the first public trail, the Lost Dog Wash Trail. Then in 2001, we introduced, 20 years ago, we introduced our first blue shirts that the stewards wear. And throughout the last 20 years, we've maintained that. It's changed in hue a little bit, but the iconic blue, because all of the users of the preserve say it is the only color they never see in the preserve, so they know our stewards are coming when they see the blue shirt. So it makes them very distinctive. In October 2007, we added new educational programs as part of McDowell Sonoran Preserve Month that included our Sunset Family Series and the Preserve Up Close. This was followed in 2008 by Family Fridays. In 2011, our first 500 stewards had been fully trained. And then in 2015, in October, the Conservancy Field Institute held its first research symposium. So great celebrations for our 30th anniversary. In our scientific work, our project that we've partnered with Intel on to determine if artificial intelligence can be used to identify invasive non-native plants in the preserve is progressing very well. Our stewards have tagged bufflegrass and fountain grass in the footage so far from the drones, and now the Intel team is using that to train its artificial intelligence to identify non-native plants. Again, as a reminder for the commission, if we are able to come out with this technology and this partnership with Intel that can identify plants based on their color signature, this could not only have implications within the preserve, but as well as across our region, state, and potentially even further to be able to identify non-native plant species much quicker. As we mentioned last time, our precipitation and rainfall has significantly increased our non-native plants, and I am very proud to say the stewards are out there spraying priority areas as part of the prioritization we have been working on with the city to tackle our non-native plant issues. I can say our fall semi-annual butterfly survey was conducted on September 25th. You've heard Tiffany and some of our folks talk about key indicator species. One of the reasons we say butterflies are a key indicator for precipitation is because if you remember in our dry year 2 years ago, when we cited less than 30 butterflies total in the survey, this year we cited 9,683 butterflies from 41 different species, including 3 new species that had never been identified in the preserve. So when we talk about key species, that's really what we're looking at to tell us the entire ecosystem and what it's doing. The precipitation also did us some wonderful results for our amphibian surveys. So they benefited extremely this year in the preserve. The probably least talked about wildlife in the preserve is our toads because they're so rarely seen without rain. We had abundant toad breeding this year, successfully documenting the entire toad phenophrase, and the woodhouse toad was observed, bringing the number of toad species in the preserve up to 5. So that is a phenomenal Update on our science work and education. Our expedition days for fourth grade is continuing development in collaboration with Scottsdale Unified and Mesa Public School District. If you remember in the past, our programs focused on third grade. And last year with COVID, we were able to expand to third grade online. With us expanding into a fourth grade online and in-person curriculum, it is going to allow us to deliver spiraling curriculum that goes through many different grades as well. We just started partnering with Scottsdale Unified last week on another project with Pathways to Learning. An organization has mobile STEM labs where we will be looking to bring our mobile learning stations from Expedition Days with their STEM lab out to Scottsdale Unified School Districts to do in-person STEM lessons with the learning stations that have always been in the preserve in the past. So that is very exciting. I can say that our collaboration with the Scottsdale Unified seventh grade teachers, you heard me talk a little bit about our new Teach the Teacher program, is progressing very well. We have a total of 7 teachers from seventh grade and one of the curriculum specialists working on this project. It includes them coming out to the preserve later this month to help develop a project that they can deliver in the classroom and in follow-up field trips with their students. As well, many of you are probably familiar with our family passport that's been around for many years. We're excited that we are replacing that with our Sonoran Desert Explorer Guide. So it is fully transitioning from basically a seek and find tool where youth would just go out and try and name things within the preserve to this is going to really dive into an all ages K through 12 booklet that will allow people to learn about the Sonoran Desert as a whole, as well as identifying species within it. And then we are branching it out to be multi-generational as well. So lifelong learners, adults, everyone will be able to get a benefit from this. With a closeout on the great work of our stewardship program. Oh, I would like to let you know we will be debuting the Explorer Guide at the Camino Campana opening on October 31st. So we're looking forward to seeing you all there and having those hot off the presses for you. Returning back to stewardship, many of our programs have restarted, including pathfinding at 6 trailheads. The 7th trailhead, Pima Dynamite, our pathfinding will begin there after the official opening. Our guided hike and bike activities have restarted with our free public hikes and bikes back in the preserve, and people loving getting out and exploring that with our stewards. I'm extremely excited to let you know we have successfully held 2 of our Stewardship 101 classes where we provide orientation, and we have welcomed over 40 new stewards in the last 2 months. And we've already seen some of our September class complete their full graduation and training and become full stewards. I want to go ahead and close with the amount of positive and amazing feedback we've received from preserve users that we're back out there resuming activities has overwhelmed us. People are so incredibly excited to see the Conservancy back, and they're participating in our activities, and we've received absolutely 0 negative feedback about restarting with what's going on in the current environment.
Thank you, Justin. That's outstanding. I will open it up for questions, but I do have a question for you. When you say, I want to make sure I got this right, 9,000 butterflies, that's moths and butterflies, I'm guessing?
My scientists say butterflies, so I will say yes.
Okay. Thank you. Just wanted to get clarification. I know we had a lot of moths at my house, so yeah.
No, right when we went out to do it, it was hysterical because even at our office, I walked out the front door and must have been swarmed by over 100 butterflies that had never been there.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. Commissioners, questions? Yes, Commissioner Olson.
Commissioner Olson here. Hi, Justin. One comment and one question. The comment is on regard to pathfinding at Pima Dynamite opening. We've been trying to set that up to staff after it's available. So not because the formal ceremony is later in the month. We're hoping to be open earlier for pathfinding.
That's awesome.
The question I had is regarding the key indicator species. I've advocated and I've voiced my desire to identify those key indicators or key species and monitor those so that we understand the health of the preserve. But I guess what do you make of the health of the preserve when you see a rainfall and you see that dramatic an increase in butterflies? I mean, does that mean that it's not really a good species to be monitoring on a year-over-year basis? It depends on whether it rains or not.
That is a very good question, Commissioner. One of the reasons butterflies have been identified throughout many ecosystems as the key indicator for precipitation is because you are able to follow trends. On a normal year with average precipitation, and the team may correct me and I'll correct myself at the next meeting if I get this wrong, but we would normally see around 1,000 to tell us that we're having average rainfall precipitation. That's why in our dry year, when we saw 25, it showed us that the lack of precipitation was so heavy that there are many different species that could be affected by it, and why we needed to work with game and fish to come in and monitor those more. When we see an abundance this heavy, it doesn't show that it's unhealthy, but it does show us that the ecosystem has received plenty, if not more than enough precipitation to thrive and be healthy.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Other questions for Justin? No other questions. All right, we will move on. Thank you so much, Justin. On to number 6, policy process update.
All right, I'm going to quickly turn this over to both Scott and Bill Murphy, our Assistant City Manager, is with us this evening as well. And as we go through all the items under item 6, we'll be presenting that, and you'll have the opportunity to get feedback from all of us, including Justin, as the case may be on some of these items. And so we're happy to walk you through that. I'm going to, a lot of this first section is responding to questions. But much of this is also filling in a lot of the boxes. I think we were asked at one of the previous meetings, when are we filling in?
Correct.
Well, we tried to fill them in for you.
Good
And
job.
so there's a lot here, and I'm going to encourage that tonight we're going to go through this pretty quick and at a somewhat high level. We can come back and go into more detail, but we also didn't want to bury you with so many numbers that it would take 4 hours to get through tonight alone. So we thought it best to get this out, get it out. You can kind of see it in context. And this really gives you a sense of what the target could be. Again, we can go up, we can go down, we can add more ranges. There's a lot of flexibility in this. This is not an absolute, and ultimately we want you to feel comfortable with it. So we're ready for questions and things like that tonight. But if we want to get into more detail, we can come back with more detailed presentations on certain aspects, much as we're doing with this first element. We're going to be happy to do that over the next several meetings.
Okay.
So we'll start with that. I'm going to let Scott take off with it.
Yes, thank you, Croy, Chair Wenstrom, Commissioners. As Croy mentioned, this is one of the items. It's number 2A in the policy chart that we've been working on. And specifically in response to questions from the commission at prior meetings in regards to the operations, daily operations and management maintenance number, the comparison of our budgets to our actuals with the goal of honing in that estimate that will be in the master chart. So this slide you have seen before. This is the roll up of our core in our budgeting. It's centered 25-100. It's our preserve operating budget. Those numbers are in here, but the reason that this is an overall operations and cost sheet is there are numbers in here that come from other places, like we've talked about in that prior presentation. So the core 25-100 budget is in here, but it has, our admin and support from other areas of the city that are also built into it. But for the purpose of looking specifically at the budget versus actuals in these next slides, we're going to be looking at numbers that include a portion of the personnel costs, because the number you see here has, our core preserve personnel, but also there's some people added into that figure from other places in the city that give support from the remainder of our community services department. But then the yellow, the contractual services and the commodities, those numbers you're looking at here lie entirely within the 25-100 budget center. And then for the last two categories, the admin and facilities and the indirect costs, we're not going to be looking at those at all in the budget versus actual. So we're basically honing in specifically to the core of the preserve budget. So just as an example, here's the chart from fiscal year 18-19. that shows you the first column is the approved budget for personnel, contracts, and commodities, then the actuals, then the variance. And you can see here, we were a little bit overspent on personnel, a little under on some of the other categories. So when it all wraps up at the end of the day, we were 3% to the good on this budget. But then looking at the 5-year projections, the budgets versus the actuals, all the way on the left, we have 16 and 17, and it builds up to 2020 and 21 on the right. And those first several years of this period, we were in our growth period. We were adding trails, we were adding trailheads. So we were actually overspent by about 3 to 8% in some of those years. But as you can see, knowing that we were adding trails and trailheads, and we added a little bit of staff time to this, the budget amount was increasing. And then we cross over into the green, particularly when March of 2020 hit. We all know what happened then. So the last 4 months of that fiscal year, there was kind of an across the board in the city, all of our budgets, reduce your spending. Don't spend it if you don't have to. So even though we had a $573,000 budget, we only spent just over $500,000. Then as you go forward into last fiscal year, because of COVID, we did reduce the overall budget by a bit, but we continued to reduce and restrict our spending due to the pandemic. So we finished about $100,000 below budget. Had COVID not hit, these numbers, based on what you see on the left side, would have tracked typically within 3 to 8%, the actual to the budget. So with that, we would be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And we do have Assistant City Manager Bill Murphy with us today that could help fill in some of that discussion at the higher city level.
Commissioner Coluccio?
Thank you, Chair. Scott, would you mind going back to slides, I guess it would be? So I guess my question is, in the last couple of years, we've had a reduction in budget, but also a big reduction in expenditures. Can you give us a sense for what those reductions in expenditures versus budget were? Just kind of a top side.
Certainly, Chair Wenstrom, Commissioner Coluccio, we're looking at about $100,000 that we were below in our expenses. A good portion of that, about 30 to 40,000, was the annual trail maintenance that we do most years. For the last 3 or 4 years, we've been using a company called ACE out of Flagstaff, the American Conservation Experience. It's sort of a youth corps type. They operate as a contractor, but they recruit youth into their programs. They all but shut down during the COVID period. So that was about a $40,000 savings there. Our actual personnel costs in the 25-100 center were about $30,000 less. The main reason that was is because we were having, and we'd updated the commission several times during that portion of the pandemic. We had lifeguards, we had people in community services and parks that run the sports leagues. We had staff that were coming out and helping us do the job that we need to do in the preserve. And they were being paid by the city. They just weren't being paid out of our budget. So we actually wound up showing a cost savings in that core of the preserve budget. And then quite a few of the items that make up the rest of it were, in normal times, we spend money on the steward events, the banquets, the educational events, the printing of the notebooks and the posters. And I mean, there's a lot of little items that wind up adding up to a pretty significant amount of money related to the volunteer training, the education events, and things that basically didn't happen during the pandemic. So the money did not get spent. So all of that wrapped up makes up that roughly $100,000 difference.
Thank you.
So that was about $40,000 then on trail maintenance, and about $60,000 was primarily on steward kinds of costs. Did I catch that right?
It was 30 to 40 on the trail maintenance, roughly 30 on the personnel cost savings because we had personnel coming from other city areas in community services helping us. And then the roughly 20 to 30,000 of the rest was the, the volunteer, the winter education event, the fall kickoff, I forget what we even called it, the wrap up at the steward recognition at the end of the season. Normally we would, spend dollars on those volunteer support costs that it just didn't happen that year.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Other questions, commissioners? Commissioner Olson?
Commissioner Olson, is the previous year the same budget savings ideas? Because it seems pretty impressive to have gotten 71K in 4 months.
I would say generally, yes. And when I went through it and I looked at, what was happening last year, but the year before, some of that stuff happened because we got through a part of a normal year, but then got shut off at the end and reduced spending. But I don't have the specifics on that year, but it was the same similar types of things that, there wasn't as much of a reduction because we got through more of that fiscal year before COVID hit and lopped off the last third of that fiscal year for us.
Follow-up question. You said that this was discussed in previous meetings. It's on. What are the count of full and part-time people that make up that 431K?
We have 4.85 FTEs that are within the preserve core. Again, when we look at that first slide, that's bringing in other resources from, our admin staff and purchasing and all that. But when you zoom into just that preserve core, it's 4.85 FTEs.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? So if we go back to the original slide, or I guess it would be the second slide, Scott, on the salaries, there we go. I can't quite read the number there, but I know it's up there. So that would there be anybody that's not included that does work at the preserve that is not included in that number? Or is that all of the people that you just mentioned?
That number includes the people that I just mentioned, but it also brings into it some of our other support personnel that help us portions of their time. And there's actually some backing out of some people as well, because like our staff at Pinnacle Peak, for example, their budget, one of those FTEs is budgeted in the preserve, but almost 70% of their time comes out back towards Pinnacle Peak. So it's kind of that number you're seeing up there it's the core plus some people being backed out, plus some people being put in. And that was the goal of this slide, was to get to not specifically that 25,100 budget, but to get to the whole, because the preserve, there are a lot of resources that come into the preserve from many other places in the city that aren't part of the core budget.
Okay, that makes sense. So all of our preserve FTEs are represented in that number.
Correct.
Okay. So that's Croy and Scott and all those people.
It's actually, Bill and I and Ruth Johnson are under the administration and facilities. But the folks out in the field and Scott are the folks that show up under personnel. Personnel also, I think, includes some IT and some other areas that do daily support to producing graphics or other things that the team may work with.
Got it. Okay. So it is the employees, if you will, actually fall under two categories then. Administration as well as employees or salaries. Okay. Yes, Commissioner Coluccio.
Commissioner Coluccio. So for the 4.85 core bodies, how much of the 431 does that represent?
Commissioner Coluccio, if you want to go into that level of detail, I would suggest that we come back with that. I don't have the detailed breakdown in front of me tonight.
Just a general guess.
So how much of that is? The majority.
General guess.
The majority of it is, because the
80%.
Croy was mentioning some of our IT support people. It's like single-digit % of their time that are added in.
That's good enough.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, Commissioner Olson?
Commissioner Olson here. Just to follow up on that, you said $30,000 to $40,000 of that savings was in trail maintenance, and don't have the specific details, but think that was involved in the number the year before. That means we've gone 2 years without trail maintenance. Are we backlogged with trail maintenance? Is the budget this upcoming year going to suffice to catch up?
We did have ACE with us in the early spring of 2020. They were with us that 1920. So that cost, we did spend that money in, 2 fiscal years ago, but we didn't last fiscal year.
And I would just add to that, that's kind of our heavy duty maintenance. But we have stewards and we have staff who continue and have continued to do maintenance throughout that period of time. A lot of what ACE has done has been work up in the areas of some of our oldest trails that tend to be in the southern part of the preserve and the more mountainous areas. And they've done areas where you either need equipment or we need a lot of, and it may be a 2-week job or something, which tends to exceed the burden we like to put on volunteers and staff alone. And so, Scott can elaborate a little bit more on that. But so we're not, although we may have missed a couple things in the past 12 months because ACE wasn't available, it's not anything that is a dramatic drop off.
Other questions? Yes, Bill.
Chair Wintram and commissioners, I think I've listened to you now for three or four of these meetings. I think it's imperative that you understand that 11 years ago, when the preserve was put into community services, it was meant to be able to have the resources to support what needed to be done. And so when you see these numbers, they're true to form. We supplement the preserve quite a bit with other areas within community services that are unseen. And so they're trying to break this out as much as you can. But the budget this year, I will tell you right now, as we go into 22-23, with the indication of where we are with some potential inflation that's out there, the number that we are using right now for 21-22, that number is probably going to be fairly close or lower than that. And so we're continually looking at where we can reduce some things, but when we can augment those with others from community services. I just don't want the commission to forget the fact that it's supported quite a bit by other areas. So these numbers, when we're squabbling over salaries or minuscule things here and there, the overall budget is there, and it's there. So I know you're looking through this chart to look at those things, but they're pretty right on where they're at. So we can get down to the nitty gritty on some things here, but I think overall, I just want you to understand that the support from community services is a great deal of why the success out there in the preserve happens. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Bill. So it sounds like a lot of the costs that go into the preserve are coming from other areas, aren't necessarily coming out of preserve funding. Does that sound correct? Am I saying that correctly?
I think the clarification I would add is it's not preserve funding. Preserve tax funding really only goes to the land acquisition and to capital improvements, i.e. the Pima Dynamite Trailhead will all be celebrating very soon, or the trails. But the day-to-day all comes from the general fund. And as opposed to having it all in just the preserve division, so to speak, what we're able to do is rely on pieces of technology or graphics or other things that the preserve itself wouldn't have the need for a full-time person, and it would be very wasteful, and budget-wise it wouldn't make any sense. But because the city is able to have those skill sets in different areas, be it in community services, and some of that indirect cost at the very bottom is your legal and some of your financial support that comes from there. So instead of, some departments may have a financial person that directly supports them, and in fact, community services does, but the preserve wouldn't be big enough to justify that. But we've always relied on folks from the city treasurer's office and things of that nature that support it. So just to be clear that it's not preserve dollars, it's city dollars of the general fund. And what we've simply been trying to do, and again, we don't have to try and recover all these costs in this effort of projecting costs, but this was meant to be as open as we could be. And we've scoured through what things get attributed to the preserve that we should put so that you understand what that cost is. Because if you look at just the number within community services, it's not $959,000. It is a smaller number. And so people might be confused. They look at that number and go, oh, wait a minute, that's not this. We're not trying to surprise anyone. We're just saying, and what Scott has highlighted here is a majority of the light blue and all the yellow are those things that tend to show up in the preserve budget direct to that. But this effort was really meant to say, well, what are the costs of the preserve? And should we be prepared to cover those in a designated funding source so that in the future, when the economy goes down and general fund dollars are harder to come by, do we want to have a core? That came from the commission, an earlier version that wanted to know what those costs were and what would it take to cover those core costs that occur on a yearly basis.
Great. Thank you for that explanation. That's helpful. Any other questions? Oh, Commissioner Olson?
Commissioner Olson here. Bill, thank you for coming and joining us for the last few sessions. I appreciate your input and involvement and the words you spoke to. I would say I'm asking as specific a question and trying to get as deep as I can to understand the numbers, because if I had a concern, I'm concerned that we're not spending enough. That a $2 billion, $1.9 billion investment by the city of Scottsdale and the staff or the folks that live here is, we're coming up with a $2 million number here. Is that really representative of what we should be spending to maintain and manage that investment? And so I'm trying to understand, if anything, I'm going to be driving numbers up, not down. So.
That's fair enough, Commissioner.
Thank you for that. Any other comments, or we will move on? Thank you.
So as I had noted before, I'll move relatively quickly. So raise your hand, throw something at me, whatever it takes. I don't want to dwell on things that you don't need more information on, but I'm sure there will be some questions along the way. We're putting a lot of numbers out here. Oh, guess I should turn on my microphone. That would help. Sorry, folks. So we will go through this, and I'm going to just kind of roll through them. We're going to start in the areas of the research and education. And again, this comes out of the policy effort, item 2B that we are looking at, and we'll start with education. And the language that has been in our documentation is the supporting of education to maintain the preserve in perpetuity. And the elements that, and again, we very much generalize these, and these are projections. And the difficulty will be, as we look at this will evolve year to year. Priorities will change. But what we were really trying to target are those things that will be programs, and we've seen programs, of course, in years past, and a lot of targeting of citizens, of the youth in Scottsdale, third graders in various programs, or fourth graders, et cetera. There's education of visitors that goes on. So in looking at that, and then the support materials that are utilized for those types of programs. And Justin was mentioning a few of those earlier. And we've provided both digital and print-based support to some of that and utilized throughout. And then the support of the various presentation programs themselves and special events, and be that the and they've gone by different names over the years, but whether they're physical programs that are out in the preserve, whether they're some of the presentations that are in our libraries, whether they're digital presentations or virtual presentations that we've learned more about in the last 18 months. It was really that entire array of things that we were looking at and identifying then that we're projecting a yearly cost of $125,000 to $150,000 in that. And when we look at the big screen, and again, I gave you all hard copies of this because I know it's very hard to read on the screen, but adding that in to the mix, and we've added over on the far side, the very far right-hand side. Are there opportunities for matching? There probably are. They may not be huge, but whether it's Indian gaming grants or some of the other areas that we may look at, we would always look at those opportunities. And working with the school district, there may be support there. Working with youth programs in the city that community services is involved in. Sometimes there's support that comes from there. So this is never really, none of these numbers are meant to necessarily be the final total number. There may be other things that are coming in that we can leverage and support on. But that in a general sense is what we were looking to target here. And we can talk about things that have been done in the past. That's probably where our best expertise comes, I guess, and whether, Justin has numbers on that, and Bill and Scott as well have recollections of that. So we can talk a little bit about that, but that's the target range that we were identifying. And again, not meant to cover everything that one might imagine, because you could go a lot further than any of these numbers that we're going to present. But what we've seen historically and what we're projecting towards, that was the range that we identified. As I said, these are going to be your numbers. And so the ability to talk about that and influence that is certainly what we wanted to do. So that's, I'll hesitate for a moment and see if there's any questions on the education side of things as we talk about that.
Commissioners, comments? Yes, Commissioner Lips.
Hi, Craig. This is Commissioner Lips. So does this include things like printing or publishing materials? Does this include things like the use of office space, of auditorium space and room space, those types of things? That's what's going into that number?
Commissioner Lips, so any of the buildings that we use, the auditorium, we don't charge a fee for that. That's just part of the partnership we have with the Conservancy. As far as the duplication of materials, that would be in those numbers.
Okay.
Commissioners, other questions about yes, Commissioner Paluccio.
Commissioner Coluccio here. So I just want to clarify for myself, I guess, and I'm sure talked about this. This exercise is really an attempt to estimate what the costs are going to be. This isn't a budgeting exercise. Is that correct?
That's a very nice point. Thank you for raising that. It really is a projection effort. And we'll have to evolve. And this is not meant to be the final point of discussion on it. The goal will be to get something in front of the council in a couple of months, and they'll give us some feedback. Are we consistent with their hopes or expectations or visions? And I would guess then after the first of the year, we can regather and take input from their feedback and do some adjusting and tweaking to this. So that's where don't feel that you have to be perfect. Don't feel that you have to be able to answer every question today, because some other people may come at us with some ideas or thoughts. So the flexibility in that, I think, is very useful and helpful at this point.
So I'm just really trying to make sure I have a clear understanding. Let's just say if we think the number is between $125,000 and $150,000 a year, over here we have matching opportunities, anywhere from $0 to $100,000. That doesn't offset that number. It really just dovetails into it, potentially where the source of the funding would come from.
And there may be others who see that differently, but yes, I would say our goal is these are dollars that if we get funded, a funding source, then we would start with that. And if that can be used, be it for purposes of leveraging or pairing up, if the school district wants to partner on a program and we put in some dollars and the Conservancy is involved in that, or, whatever, and the school district, and there are multiple school districts as well. So there's any number of ways that could theoretically then be leveraged, but there's no way we can predict that.
Sure.
As exactly what that is. So I don't want you to think that those red numbers are guarantees, but those are some of the things that we sense that we could do. And we may be able to do better than that in the long run. Once people know you have that funding source, then there may be more certainty to it. It's a little hard to project when you're talking about the theory of getting a funding source versus having it. And so we think there's some things, and Justin may want to speak to some of that as well. I know from their side of the world, they see a much bigger difference when there's actually that type of funding source there. So this is a very difficult dynamic. And as we've been waiting to get really engaged fully in this, trying to balance some of that. And to your original question, this isn't a budget. And let me add another thing. As we look at all these numbers, depending upon what the council wants to do in pursuit of a funding source and how they want to do that. And if we are going to go to the voters for something, there's going to need to be an assurance to the voters that dollars get used for the types of things that we're talking about, and that there's some transparency to that. And when you go back to the early visions of this commission, and this goes back to about 2015, when this started evolving as to looking at how do we assure that the long-term protection of the preserve is somehow accounted for. There was always a thought that there'd be some type of mechanism that with our budget process, the opportunity for at least some aspects of this and prioritizations of education and research and, some of these other programs that we'll get into in the invasives and restoration would be things that would make a lot of sense for the budget process to come through this commission and kind of reaffirm priorities consistent with master plans that may be out there or other things. And then that goes forward into the council budget process. And we have similar examples of that through our human services and other programs in the city. And so that may be a way to assure citizens who might be asked for a funding source that, yes, we will do that. Now, could there be flexibility, particularly when we get into the invasives and wildland fire and the restoration and some of that mapping and monitoring? There may be on a yearly basis some ups and downs in those areas that we may assign more to invasives one year or more to wildland fire or more to restoration. But that would be something that would be very easy in the prioritization effort, and working with staff, Conservancy, research folks, et cetera, we can bring a recommendation to you and say, hey, this year, instead of 168,001, we might recommend that go to 190. And we're a little bit lower in invasives that year, but the next year it might cycle back. And whether that has to do with more or less rainfall or whatever it would be, we think there's room for flexibility in that without it being, oh, we're just not going to do something. So some of this will be an assignment of measurables. And in some of these, you're going to see acreages or other things that we'll target and be able to document back on a yearly basis that we took care of this much area from a wildland fire fuel reduction standpoint, or from a invasive plant treatment standpoint. We'd be able to report on that to this commission, to the council, and the taxpayers who would be footing the bill. So
Absolutely.
and I
Understood.
don't know exactly how to describe that today, but I think that as your discussion, the council's discussion, and then the funding mechanism discussion, that's when we'll refine that language.
Perfect. Thank you. And going back to the education aspect, I think it would be valuable actually for commissioners to hear from Justin Owen with the Conservancy on what your vision is when you look at numbers like that. What would be, if we're, it's, we have to hear a full situation here.
Well, I'm a visionary, I think is what you're asking. No, I'm just kidding. From context on this, it goes back to what we all talk about when we just talk about fundamentally supporting something. It's like you support what you love and you love what you know. And if you don't know about it, you can't fall in love with it, and then therefore you won't support it. So when we look at the act of stewardship for something like the preserve, education is the cornerstone for what we do. Because if you teach someone about it, they can fall in love with it, and then they can support it. And I look back to, we talk about the preserve pioneers, we talk about the people that made this possible. And I look at our history, and the only reason the preserve is here today, the only reason the taxes were so even past the voters, was because our founders and those original visionaries did field trips for elementary school kids. Because they took elementary school kids out to this state trust land. And it goes back to nonprofit thinking. But if you take a bunch of kids out to an area that they fall in love with, what's the first thing they're going to do when they go home? They're going to brag about it to their parents, and they won't stop talking about it. So when that sales tax comes up for vote, their parents know about it. And they say, oh my God, my kids loved that. I have to support that. So the cornerstone of the preserve and the Conservancy is education. I can by far speak to that it is where we should be devoting the most amount of attention as possible. And we've seen it over the years. We saw the stewards. One of the things we greatly say about them is our stewards, one of their primary functions is to learn so that then they can ultimately teach. And we look at that in anybody of the 1.3 million users we've had in the last year. Of if they can learn something, then they can teach it. And if they can teach it, then this can go on to support itself in perpetuity. When I look at even the preserve as it stands today, it is permanently protected as long as people are supported of it. And as long as it is protected by the people in future generations. I had a great conversation with one of our leaders today about, and people might think it's a little bit cheesy, but it's the proverb that I live by since I've been here of we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And if we can get people to visualize it, that education is what does this, yes, I think we could invest a lot more than this, but what this does is secure an opportunity for whomever the education provider is, whether it's the city, whether it's the Conservancy, it's a starting point. So I'd be lying if I didn't say, yes, I've got grander visions, because that's part of why I'm here, is to have the grand visions. But when we approached this, we said, if we want to be able to provide education that is useful, this is our starting point. This is our baseline. When we look at it, because I'll use the example we've experienced in the last 3 years. Our stewards are the most amazing people in the world. They fulfill everything we do. But a lot of the times, these areas of professional expertise aren't their background. So our what is now Expedition Days, what is our Junior Citizen Science Festival, Bill and Croy and I have talked about it substantially. Why didn't it hit home with Scottsdale Unified? Why did I have a 52-person school bus show up from Scottsdale Unified and 4 students get off? And it wasn't because we didn't have passionate stewards that wanted to educate and wanted to change our world. It's because our learning stations didn't match what they wanted to learn. So in the last 2 years, when we transitioned everything to standards-based curriculum, the teachers no longer said, oh, it's a day out of class I have to make up for. They said, oh my goodness, you are helping me because you're doing something I already have to do. And guess what? I'm not having to talk to them about squirrels in London, like their textbook says. I get to show them in the desert. So when we talk about our baselines and where we are, no matter who the provider is, so that that organization can have the professional expertise on their staff to be able to do it. The last 2 years, we've gone out and privately fundraised to pay for the cost to cover what we're doing right now in the preserve. And my biggest fear when asked, how do we do that for the next 25 years, is the next downturn, the next pandemic. If there is not a secure funding source to take care of this asset, we can't guarantee that level of delivery. And thanks to technology, I did get a text message. It was all butterflies, no moths.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Tiffany.
That is exactly who. So thank you, Tiffany.
Thanks for that. Yes, a question from Commissioner Palasco.
Hey, thank you. Commissioner Paplasco. I'm sure the Conservancy does, and I'm thinking the city of Scottsdale, but do we have a list of very specific goals, tangible goals related to education in the preserve that we can show people? And we're like, yeah, we want to increase the budget in education, and this is what it's going to be spent for. And you can see how the impact, I think the citizens want to understand the impact. And I'm involved with the education department with the Conservancy now, and I teach at ASU, so I'm all big on this whole education thing. But I think the citizens need to have a better understanding of what they're getting.
I think the short answer is that we don't have a document that's approved per se, or that says that, but we have evolved over time with a number of things that have been done. And whether that's with our partnership with the Conservancy, or things that are done in the programs in community service, or the things that are done directly by staff in the field. But that would be part of what part of the goal here is to come back in and define some of these things, but get a sense, a little bit of getting a sense from you of what some of those priorities are as well. So that's my sense would be, as we get direction from the council, we would come back through and add the definition to those things, so that voters, should they be asked, would have something to know what those are. And that would be the baseline that we would be able to use.
I know from the Conservancy's point of view, we have a list. We have a list of things that we've identified, but much like any nonprofit, it's if we are fortunate enough to be able to fulfill the work and it can be funded, we can very much articulate and tell the story. And it's one of the things that I want to remind the commission, and I've told staff, if this moves forward and the council wishes to move this forward, the Conservancy will be very aggressively stepping back into its advocacy role that it started with 30 years ago. And the advocacy work we did to help advocate for the first two initiatives, that is something we've committed to the city, we commit to the commission, is that we're here to help advance this, and we're here to help take the voter and the citizen on the journey and identify those areas. So if our ideas are incorporated in, we'd be very grateful, but also ideas from the commission, we are happy to articulate that and tell a story, because we recognize as a private nonprofit, the city is unable to. Legislatively, they cannot advocate for it because they have to be impartial. So we think that the commission and the city, and I know have some bias in this, is very lucky to have an organization like the Conservancy to advocate for something like this, because it is within our wheelhouse.
Thank you, Justin. Any other questions on the education topic? Yes, Commissioner Olson.
Commissioner Olson here. I'm working off what Commissioner Cluccia stated, which I thought was an interesting statement, because we're not, if I understand correctly, we're not working against an existing budget. We haven't had an existing budget for education. So we're creating something new. And since we haven't had it, we're kind of ballparking a number to get at. Am I going down the right path?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly have been dollars spent. But to say that have they been as targeted as what we're talking about here? No, we haven't really approached it that way, but has between community services and between limited on the preserve side, but have there been city dollars that have gone forward? Certainly there have been Conservancy dollars as well, and supporters of the Conservancy that have donated to education causes, and to some extent support from some of the school districts. But those would all be things that, this isn't singularly, these numbers are what we'd be looking for taxpayer dollars theoretically. But why we're trying to show that column on the right is it could evolve into bigger things, but we're not going to be able to promise or guarantee what that side is going to be.
Okay. So just following this thread a little bit, is this bigger than what the Conservancy has been doing in education? Does it cover more, or is it overlap significantly? Or
well, I'll start, and I'm sure Justin will add here. I don't think it's necessarily bigger, but this is certainly much more than we've ever proposed from the city to support a baseline. And I think with that and with what the Conservancy has been able to generate interest in and support for before, this again would be something that we think could be leveraged to a higher degree. The hard thing is to promise that. What we have to assure the voters is it's a baseline. And where it goes beyond that is something that, we will endeavor as a combined team, I am sure, to take it much further than where 125 or 150,000 on its own might go. But we will do everything we can to match that up.
And I'm just trying to get some ability to conceive that 150K or 125 to 150 is the right ballpark. And I, at this point, have no more information. It could be 300K and I wouldn't know the difference. So I'm searching for a way to say, yeah, that makes sense. That's a good number.
So that's a fair question. And we can certainly come back at you in a future meeting with some additional thoughts on that. I think those are things.
And this is Justin from the Conservancy again, for those listening in. I can say that Croy hit the nail on the head, that this was a baseline. So I do want to say, to reassure everybody, that's what these numbers, when we were helping the city pull this, of how much would it cost for, whether it's the Conservancy or ASU or whomever, how much would it to start these programs? That's why we're using the word baseline. These numbers weren't out of thin air, for lack of better terms. There's a lot of analysis that went into the specialties we work in. And Carrie, Commissioner Olson, in the sphere of what we could do with a higher end top number, we could deliver a lot more services, but this was to be able to provide the services that we're currently providing without it being dependent upon private funding from elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So this was not, when I said at the last meeting, a wish list, this, for at least from the Conservancy's point of view, was documented historical information to continue to do what we do now and guarantee it could be delivered for 25 years. But to be able to do more than the services that you see our organization doing now, it would be a higher top end number. But I know when we met, the city staff and us met to talk about this, I know tonight we wanted to do a top view of a lot of these. And then if there were some we wanted to dive deeper in, how did we get there and what could we go, that we wanted to save time for that at another meeting just to get through them all tonight. But this definitely, I know from the Conservancy's point of view, wasn't the intent that we just put yeses on all these and then just say, okay. It was that if 2B education was one we wanted to do a deeper dive into, then we could definitely do that at the next meeting or the next. Because the Conservancy did a lot of research and used backgrounds into National Park Service, into universities, into other conservancies across the country to say, here is the most robust program, here is a baseline program. And I can say the most robust we're probably not going to get to, because that's the federal government and they have a lot different funding mechanisms, but we have everything in between. This was our baseline to continue to do the work that we're doing now uninterrupted if an organization like ours had a loss of funding.
Thank you for that clarification. That's very helpful. Yes, Commissioner.
Commissioner Smith here. Just a short question. Do we have, is there a multi-year plan on education? Like where we're at today, where we want to be in 5 years? I guess I don't know, other than, a few of the things that, we're throwing around here that we're already doing. But is there a plan that we want, that we could see to know where we could go?
This is Justin with the Conservancy again. I can say the current plan that we have with the city is what's in our master services agreement. The education programs consist of trailhead ambassadors, patrol ambassadors, and then learning stations. It's very, very minimal. All of the education programs outside of that are part of the Conservancy strategic plan and business plan. And we do have that documented with we have 5-year goals, 10-year goals of what we'd love to do, but specifically in the context of the preserve, the only outlined education programs are the Trailside Naturalist Program and our Trailhead Ambassadors and Patrol Ambassadors.
And are there more than just those that you would like the Conservancy to?
Absolutely. So
But
currently,
see, we don't know. I don't know that.
No,
I don't know
and-
what you want.
and
And I don't
that's,
know how much anything, like in my head, I can probably come up with an idea of what something might cost, but I have no idea what you keep saying, yeah, we want more. Yeah. What is it?
It sounds like if Justin can come back with that kind of data, that we'll have a better sense to maybe get some deeper numbers. Does that sound?
yeah, absolutely. And one thing we want to be conscious of is the Conservancy is very much in this role being the advocate for the preserve first, and then the advocate for the Conservancy second. So the hat that I'm wearing tonight is, and it's a great question, Commissioner Smith, of these are the programs, no matter who the provider. So one of the things that we did 2 years ago is the Conservancy and the city renegotiated our master services agreement to make it competitive. We were in an evergreen agreement that never expired. And 2 years ago, we revised our agreement with the city to renew every 5 years. And that was to be completely transparent with the community. And optically, the Conservancy wants to competitively be the advocate for this asset and this resource. So the hat that I'm wearing tonight in speaking to this is as the advocate for the preserve. This is some of the stuff we can do now, but I can absolutely come back and say the things that we'd love to do. So in the baseline, to give you context of where we are for this number was coming off of what we're doing right now with Trailside Naturalist Stations, with our Expedition Days program, which is our 4-day in-preserve education program, as well as our virtual program that lasts a month online that we do in Scottsdale Unified and Paradise Valley. And this year we adopted Mesa Unified, as well as our Sonoran Desert, or Spectacular Saguaro field trips, which is our STEAM one. We partnered with Scottsdale Arts, where the students actually get to build a saguaro, so they don't just learn about it, but they actually get to build one. And then we do our senior field trips. Those are some of my favorites. We haven't had those since COVID because of the delicate health issues. So we do multi-generational learning, and we have had to stop our lectures at Mustang Library. That was another education program we're currently doing. And Scott, help me out here. We also introduced our interpretive hikes this year. So about 4 years ago, all of our hikes were fitness-based. So we introduced what we're calling our nature walks or hikes, depending however you want to look at it, 3 years ago, where instead of a 6-mile fitness hike, which so many people are intimidated by, we would do a 1/2 mile to a 1.5 mile interpretive educational hike. And that's the examples I've used where the public attending our hikes went from 2 people when it was purely fitness. Yes, we had some that had 5 or 10, but to 120 to 150 general public coming out once there was interpretive wildflower hikes and butterfly hikes. And those are the baseline of what we're doing right now, but we could absolutely articulate what we'd love to do more of.
I would like to see something in the future, just for my own curiosity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that commissioners, the other part, Justin kind of touched on a lot of those, a lot of where we're looking at. So if we go back many years ago, we did a program with our adapted services kids who are in the program, primarily to get them out into the Sonoran Desert, but also to encourage their parents to take them out. We filmed all that, and we had that as something that we did. We as the city we have a lot of resources. We have 4 libraries that we can have numerous lectures at. We have senior centers that we can have those conversations with the seniors and get them out. So when we look at the educational end of things, we as the city is continual learning. We think that that's a big goal that we continually do. Are they measurable? Yes, we can measure those by once we set those in motion with the library staff or the senior centers working closely with Justin's staff. We did the after school programming initially, which really has led to the really fantastic program that the Conservancy has now, where the kids that are in our after school program, we introduced them as a field trip to take them out to the desert. to see it and do the interpretation that we had. The lights on after school that we do to make people aware about our after school programming. The Conservancy has been right there with us to educate everybody who comes to that event. So our partnership is really twofold. And I think the numbers, when you look at these, again, they're baseline numbers, but we really did take a look at what some costs were that we did have over the period of time that we could kind of measure a little bit. And is it perfect? It's not, but it's close for us as a starting point. And I think Croy kind of touched on it. My vision of this whole process as we do this is we do a program right now with Human Services every year, a commission just like yourselves. People submit applications that are nonprofits. Justin's been awarded a couple dollars for those. And we prioritize what those are, and the commission vote on those, and they take them to the council. I really foresee for you in the future that that's how this will work. And so then each year, as Croy has kind of talked about here, is when you look at these as baseline numbers, there are set numbers, and each year they're going to change in each of those areas. But as Justin mentioned at the start of the conversation, the education, I can assure you from the city's point of view, is very important to us. And we have a lot of areas where we can do that. And we're very fortunate with the Conservancy, some of the real expertise that you have within the Conservancy area too, as well. So thank you.
Commissioner Smith and Assistant City Manager Murphy, thank you. But you almost gave the perfect example by asking that question. So Expedition Days is a program that if the Preserve funded the educational baseline, the team to be able to deliver it, then we went to Human Services Commission, excuse me, and asked for supplemental funding to pay for the school buses. So they gave us $3,000 to pay for the school buses. So that's a great example of where it could sit in the matching. But also I know we've had, and we'll dive into this deeper, but we've had some great conversations about the living laboratories concept at Pima Dynamite. And the school district has already said, if you could build out that concept and support it, we'll pay for the buses. We'll even pay, we're very excited that Scottsdale Unified offered to pay for substitute teachers for our Teach the Teacher days, if we could provide the commitment to train the teachers, which is what we're looking at. This could be able to give the provider the opportunity to do that. So that's why, even though Croy and Scott and maybe Bill can't go out and find those matching dollars, we're committed to being able to, because if we can get the baseline, we want to expand it. So the living laboratory concept, which we'll come back to and revisit if you're interested in the education, because it's not included in here, was what's garnered the most support from the schools, because it's the opportunity for students to not just hear from a scientist, not just be able to see a scientist's work, but to be able to conduct the scientific research. And because protecting that biodiversity is a huge part of to be the next one, research, we're utilizing an asset that's already needed for research to further the education program in a way that students can do it hands-on. That's moving mountains in the district right now.
Thank you so much, Justin. Great question, Commissioner Smith. Appreciate that. Yes, Commissioner Olson.
Commissioner Olson here. Some great questions over here have me thinking that in like we have the ERP for the what's it called? Ecological resource plan. We have a culture plan. We have other plans that become our guiding
Guiding document.
Guide for how we're going to approach and perform in that space. Do we need one of those for education? Should we maybe carve off 100 grand or 150 grand or something like that as a one time to put a plan together? Because this is a city plan, not a Conservancy plan. This is a city plan of how we're educating. The Conservancy may get some of the money, but they may not get any. I mean, it depends. And so I think we're struggling with goals, we're struggling with a plan, and I'm struggling with a dollar number. If we had some guiding print, manual, I think it would make a lot more sense.
Well, we're certainly going to talk about that under the ecological resource plan itself, one of the upcoming items. But I think with some of the things that may already exist that we simply haven't had time to present or come back, I think that's something that we can bring back and talk about, whether it needs a singular master plan or not, we can have that discussion. There's other ways of funding that too. We can make a request to the general fund to initiate that if we felt that was timely. But for the purpose of getting something to the council, we're not going to have time to get all those done ahead of time.
No,
to have
it's no
something
different
done
than
in 2
the
months.
150K you put in for the ERP.
Yep.
Is I just wonder if we shouldn't initiate that because we are, I think, doing some level of guessing. I mean, there's some work behind it and it's a baseline, but we don't know exactly what we want to accomplish with this. How do we put a program in place that'll get us to a point of knowing that?
And for the point of time now, I'm going to say we've got to be comfortable guessing in some of this. And that isn't meant to make you comfortable. It's just meant to say that's going to be a little bit of this process and having something to deliver to the council in a couple of months. But your point is right as far as the long-term vision. And certainly all of these are meant to have, whether you're tying to land acquisition master plans or trailheads master plans or things like that. But we can come back with some additional documentation as Bill noted earlier, that there are some things that are within some more of the community services that speak to some of that education goals that we may want to build off as well. So I think there's some different ways we can approach that.
So no,
I didn't
we're not
say
going to
no.
add any budget
No,
for
it's
it.
not a no, it's a matter of, I think we want to come back with ways, and we can add that. I've made the note, we can add that as an option, but I think there may be some other.
Yeah, I don't know what the
items.
other is. So, yeah, if there's something that is significant in that space, I think that's.
And that's what we
something
can
we'd
bring
like
back.
to see.
Again, tonight, we're not going to have every detail to answer every question.
Don't mean to go there tonight.
Yep.
Okay.
Great. I think we are done with education. We're going to move on to research.
Alrighty. Again, building off of that and the research identified in very general terms, the plants, wildlife, natural resources to maintain the biological diversity and long-term sustainability of the area's ecology. And that comes from the ecological resource plan. The very core things that we're identifying here is establishing and continuing the long-term monitoring of flora and fauna. Again, that's not every what was it that Tiffany reported, 1,500? It's not everyone that's going to be able to be monitored. Our number would be ridiculously high at that point. And then we certainly have the urban interface impacts and the preserve edges and the impacts of users within the preserve as well that we've talked about some as well. Some of this, many of these have some interrelationships, and I think Justin hinted at it earlier, is that some of the research leads to education and is very supportive of that. And so as we're doing new research, there may be support materials that develop off of that. And again, back to the digital and print-based materials that come out of some of this would be elements that be included in there. And ultimately, a lot of this is looking for the determination of thresholds for change within the preserve that are concerning, or is something going to impact that. And so very general summarization of something. And again, we identified, and some of this is again based on work that we've been doing, work that we'd like to do. Could that number be much higher? Absolutely, it could. But this was the point of what we felt was a range. It's in many ways an increase over what the city, it certainly is an increase over what the city has been providing the funding for, but consistent with some of the elements that the Conservancy has been doing. And again, fitting that in to the overall chart, the same type of idea. And, again, back to, are there Indian gaming grants? Are there opportunities for matching up with other organizations or other agencies, land management agencies in or around the valley or the Sonoran Desert that may have some shared elements? And again, very difficult to promise that, but having an assured funding source is something that helps lead to developing that. And what I thought I'd do is let me jump into the next one, which is related to this. And we were kind of talking about it with education, but it's the opportunity to update the ecological resource plan. And this was an idea of proposing a one-time cost to update that plan and begin to help all of us, because I think Commissioner Olson's query on education is going to be very similar, I'm going to guess, on research. What is the right, answer to that? And it is very hard to absolutely say that, but keep in mind that this is a starting point and that we have the future to be able to adjust and request, be it other general fund dollars or other things in the future. There are other ways to fund some of these things than just this. This, again, I go back to if the economy were to be very difficult and that core general fund funding source were being reduced, what things would we like to have a core level at? So this is not meant to be the bottom. This is meant to be the bottom if we've got nothing else. But if we've got other things, we think there's a tremendous amount of leverage that comes with that. And so we'd identified a one-time cost of $150,000 in that. And again, that's added, but you put that whole package together then under the education and research. And that's really what we were looking to present, because we have not been funding these in nearly the substantial amount that these are listed at this point here. So again, I'll step back and open it up for questions or other comments from the Conservancy and Scott and Bill.
Great. I would just like to share, when I look at the not the Conservancy, when I look at the preserve, to me, that is a 31,000 acre research plot that we have so much opportunity there. I think the education will actually lead to more research. To Justin's point, people love what they know, and the more they know, the more they want to know and the more they want to support. Because we are in such a unique position in Scottsdale that we had the foresight to put these 31,000 acres aside, our $2 billion asset. So I wonder how we can possibly not support at this height and more. So just my 2 cents. Questions and comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Olson.
I think you hit the nail on the head for me. This is almost the same discussion as education. I mean, we don't have detail. I've been bringing this topic up for the last couple of months that I've been a commissioner, and you kept putting it off going, we'll get there. I guess we're not there, because this doesn't have the detail to know that if we spend this much money, we are protecting the preserve. I don't know how to answer the question.
And we'll open up as well to others here. But again, some of these projects are things that you would not necessarily do the research each and every year. Others are things that you want to do for a multiple number of years in a row. And that's going to be the difficulty of saying that, oh, again, back to this, excuse me, this is not a budget, but a projection that we were looking to establish an appropriate baseline range that, again, by going out and looking for other partners that might be interested in the same types of things, and whether that's the county regional parks, the Tonto National Forest, those are all agencies that we could look to. And again, many of them don't have big budgets on this, and it will take some time. But again, are those things that we can start with? And again, I think Justin will be able to answer in many similar ways to some of the education discussion, that there are different things that we can leverage off of in that having an assured baseline number is going to give us a certainty of having certain programs. And as we are able to achieve, be it partnerships or other things, we can leverage up on those areas. And so that's the difference, going through this and trying to figure out, well, exactly we don't want to promise something that won't exactly happen, but I do think we want to talk about what is a range. And I think the surest thing is being able to say that if our goal is this, then that's what we will at a minimum commit to that effort, and it can always ramp up from there.
Quick question. I'm sorry. This is Chair Wenstrom. Quick question. What was the previous budget that we had set up for research? I know you said this was considerably above.
Yeah, we've been spending some things in specific to the initial work on invasives and restoration. But that has typically been in the somewhere between the 50 to 100,000 range. And that's pretty much I would say the historical, Scott, unless I'm missing anything.
Okay.
It's been in that range up to this point. And again, part of this is not a matter of right, wrong, or indifferent, but the history has been get the preserve and acquire it. And then as we've been doing that, and as we've been closing out, knowing that we're closer to completion, and not saying it's done, but the amount left to achieve is much smaller than where we were, 30 years ago. That now it's moving more into the management role. And that's really been this discussion over the past 5-6 years with the commission, is working towards that. How do we move from a very much an acquisition and improvements? There was a big desire to assure that promises to the voters of acquiring the land, and for some having access to the land, i.e. the trailheads and the trails, was an important element. And so those were some of the things that, as Scott's been involved and Bill and I got involved, that we wanted to assure that the promises made to the voters were delivered on. And, quite often and it's really kind of what we're talking about here. If we're going to make promises to the voters that we're going to do something, then we want to make sure we deliver on that. Well, the promises that were made on both the initial 95 and the second 2004 sales tax said we're going to get land, and we're going to do improvements for access for citizens who voted for this. That, yes, there's preservation, but there was also recreation as part of that. And so those were directives that we were given and the commission shared and moving forward. But the long-term then vision on the management is really what we're cutting our teeth on here and starting the first steps. And that's my emphasis is we will have multiple chances to continue to refine this. And I think there's good opportunities to identify with an update to the ecological resource plan and other things to help further that education and what those targets ultimately should be. But they only, 5, 10, 20 years from now, I am sure they will still be evolving. And that's my point, is that let's get our best shot out right now, make sure we get it started and establish that, and we'll keep building on that.
That's a good improvement in the research number for sure, to at least start at $250,000. So it's a start. That also would then entail our deer collaring studies, things like that, our tortoise telemetry, all that would be included in that number, plus other things.
And again, some of those we picked up matching dollars for, and that's the type of thing that's very hard to quantify. We can look at the history of some of that and identify that that's been done. And Bill and Scott.
Chair Wenstrom,
Yes.
I know that when we did the collaring through the gaming dollars that we received, that was over $100,000 over 2 years that we did that. The flyover, which we continue to keep doing, which we report on, which we budget for annually. So that is research information that we're continuing to use. Tiffany is using it. The Game and Fish is using it. So yes, the tortoise study that they're doing right now, those are the kinds of things that when you start to look at, when we came up with the number here, we figure, okay, there's $100,000 for that particular project. We're spending between 50 and 100,000 with the Conservancy now to do some research out there now. They are spending more than that in some of the grants that they're securing. So I think it's probably a good number to start with. And I can see the frustration that you all have because you're defending these, but initially we have to start with something to be able to build from that. And it's kind of like if we started a business and we had to create a budget, that's exactly what you're trying to do here, is just try to come up with something. And once we get there, then I think then we really will have a better idea on where those numbers really truly fall. So
and I think we're learning that more and more. To have the detail that we have this meeting that we haven't had previously is really helpful. So I think that we do understand that it is a baseline. It is a projection, but obviously we're concerned citizens, so we have a lot of questions, but thank you so much for that clarification.
And Chair Winstrom, this is Justin from the Conservancy. I can tell you to touch exactly on what Assistant City Manager Murphy just said. One of the things we identify in our work is scientific research, unfortunately, is the least outside funded work. It is the one that's the hardest because it's what we talk about in climate and ecosystems globally, of because they're slow moving systems, they're not as attractive because it takes 20 years for something to happen. Whereas, for lack of better terms, wildlife is fluffy and cute and people recognize that. But when we talk about protecting biodiversity and protecting an ecosystem, we're looking at trying to make sure that the preserve has long-term baseline funding to continue to take care of it when those times aren't happening. But as Assistant City Manager Murphy just pointed out, our tortoise telemetry project, because we have that baseline scientific staff that does monitoring the pulse of the preserve, we went to Game and Fish and got $40,000 to pay for the equipment for tortoises. The city went and got funding to pay for the Game and Fish helicopters for the deer monitoring. We went to a private foundation and got the $50,000 to pay for the collars. So what the goal was in establishing this and working with Bill and Scott and Croy was, what can we do to provide the baseline to ensure we can do these, and then the bigger projects will absolutely go. And if the voters and the commission and the council want to fund the bigger projects in here, that will increase. But if we can make sure that we can continue to deliver all the time, I would like to point out for the commission that the $150,000 for the revision of the ERP has been advocated for by city staff. So by Bill, Scott, and Croy, to exactly address what Commissioner Olson brought up. All of us have recognized in the meetings leading up to this, how amazing would it be if we had a plan, if we had something that could be easily articulated, that these are our goals, something as brilliant as the city charter with the preserve charter. And when the Conservancy created the ecological resource plan a few years ago, it was because we had minimal resources. So that's why it's a minimal plan. Now that we can dedicate funding, hopefully, to it, we can dedicate the resources to it to get that plan. And the education piece of it too, we're right now tying in the Conservancy strategic plan that all of our scientific research in the Sonoran Desert, not just the preserve, is only applicable if we can interpret it into education. So our directive in our strategic plan is that we're not going to conduct scientific research that is duplicative. If there are other organizations doing great research in that, we'll utilize their research to advance the preserve in the desert. But our scientific research is going to be dedicated to things that currently aren't being studied and that can be conversely translated into the education programs to build unique programming that make people passionate about this place and about this space. So I can say that I just wanted to point that out, that staff has been incredibly supportive about updating these plans, and working with the city has been great in that, because they strive just as much for us to have a solid game plan and not be guessing.
That's terrific. I don't have any idea, you perhaps do, Justin, of what other studies go on in other deserts, other arid places, but it certainly would be wonderful to put the preserve on the map for Scottsdale and the world in the research aspect of things.
Well, and to answer your question from the more global view, arid environments are the least researched and studied and documented environments in the world. And it's because humans have never had to live in them. But now that humans are being forced to live in arid environments, and as arid environments continue to grow due to changes in our climate, it is becoming paramount for the human species to continue to thrive in that, for more research to happen. Because unfortunately, I'll just use the perfect example. In the 40s and 50s, when agriculture moved to the Valley of the Sun, moved to Scottsdale and Maricopa County, and destroyed the soil crust to build agricultural purposes, there was no idea of what it was, why it was bad. And now that agriculture has moved out, the degradation of soil dust is the primary cause for our dust storms. The primary reason we have these giant haboobs and dust storms in the valley is lack of soil crust in prior agricultural areas. where it's the work we're doing now that we would love to continue in the preserve of reestablishing soil crust. It takes 15 to 20 years in a healthy ecosystem to reestablish itself. It takes 80 to 100 years to reestablish itself in a burned system. And the work that we're just on the tip of the iceberg on in the preserve specifically we're conducting this work, is yielding results that we could reduce that 15 to 20 or 80 to 100 year cycle down to less than 18 months. And that's the stuff that is going to take care of this ecosystem for the future. And we talk about in some of our updates with staff, we're talking about our future restoration efforts. It's like when we look at the ecosystem that is the preserve, it is one of the most biodiverse systems in our area. As you pointed out, it's the largest municipally owned urban preserve in North America, not just in Arizona, not just in the United States, in our continent. And it is such an amazing asset that the ecosystem in the Northern Preserve versus the gooseneck versus the Southern Preserve are all different. We remember when we had 2 feet of snow on Tom's Thumb, and those of us down in the Southern Preserve were going, what are you talking about? It's sunny down here. So it does give us the opportunity, but I know our scientists are passionate about the fact that we're experiencing 15 to 20% less precipitation right now than we had historically. We can't restore an ecosystem that required 20% more precipitation. We need to continue the research to know what species are going to thrive in 20% less precipitation, so we can continue to restore that within the preserve to make it an abundant ecosystem and the amazing asset it is.
Good point. Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Hackbarth. Thank you, Justin, by the way.
Thank you. I'd like to bring in a advocation. I'd like to advocate for increasing the research to include things like archaeology, because it does give you a time depth, whether it be fossil pollen from different sites, faunal remains, or archaeological sites. You can have a greater perspective of what is going on in the past. And towards that end, would further your own ecological view of what is here at the preserve.
Thank you, Commissioner Hackbarth. I saw Commissioner Hackbarth and then Commissioner Olson.
Commissioner Cluccio. So my first question is the ecological resource plan. Where can I find a copy of this so I can familiarize myself with it?
It's on the city's webpage under the preserve.
I can find it, but should be able to find it there. Sure.
Most of these plans that we have, I think, are all out there in one tree.
So what is the need then, or the purpose? What is the purpose of updating the ecological resource plan at this or some not too far in the future point in time?
I think Justin started hitting on it just a little bit there,
Yeah.
In the sense that when we first did that, and I think that started about 10 years ago, that was in the early days. We still didn't have all the acquisition that we have today, but we were starting to look at this long term of how are we going to manage, what are the priorities, and I think it's really to take it another step is what we're talking about. There weren't a lot of resources back then. We don't necessarily have a lot more yet, but if we were to achieve something along the lines of what we're talking here, we want to make sure that to some of your questions, but really to the citizens, that if we're going to make a commitment that we want to fund something, then what can we get out of that? And I think that would be really the goal of the ecological resource plan, is kind of an update for all of us. But certainly new commission and to have something that comes out with maybe a bit more of a focus than the previous one did on what's that long term, what's that next 5 years, what should we be looking at, and that would be updated on a fairly regular basis, that you would evaluate what's been done and then look at moving forward. So there'd be a little bit of a looking back and what's been accomplished, and then taking the step and looking forward and what are the key things. And that would go through, as the original did, it came through this commission and went to the council, and that would be the goal of doing something on those lines. And really, much as we talk about land acquisition plan updates or trail plan updates, it's a little bit of a similar, and again, it's not exactly 10 years old, but as we got into this discussion, it's like, well, we really need to make sure we update that. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but we just ought to bring it along.
Things change.
And this would be the timely approach.
So one of the things that Commissioner Olson has talked about at previous meetings was to have, what are the key indicators that, might tell us whether the preserve is in good health or not? Would something like that be included, or could that be included in a new, an updated ERP, or is it in the old one?
It is in the old one in a very general sense, and I'll let Scott pick up on that.
The current ERP does talk about key indicator species, really a lot in the concept of key indicator species, but also since it was the first ecological plan we had, it also talks a lot about the baseline, because it was, and when Tiffany was here and in the presentations you've heard in the past from her, where she talks about the number of species that are in the preserve. When we wrote that first ERP, we didn't know what those species even were. Like, it had never been, we had a good idea, and started with a list of things we think are out there. But when you go back and look at that original ERP, it talks about setting a baseline and, doing the, really just the searching, going out and literally, the stewards and other, scientists and, botanists and other professionals scoured the preserve. That happened after that ERP was prepared. So basically the ERP we have now kind of set us off on figure out what's out there. It talks generally about key indicator species and other scientific methods and goals. But the discussion now would be, we've learned so much in the last few years. When we update the ERP now, how does that launch us into the future with actually, designing projects and setting out research, specific research goals? Because when you read the current one, it's very broad.
So I guess, to me, key indicators, would include species and how many do we have and how healthy they are. But I would think that it would also potentially include things like the amount of rainfall that we're getting, the amount of erosion that has taken place, within the preserve, variety of things like that, that would once again kind of help us do a report card that says, yes, the preserve is in good health, or no, we've got to do some things in order to get it there. So if that's the kind of thing that could be included in an updated ERP, then, to me, it makes sense that we consider doing that.
And we can certainly bring back a very summary presentation of the existing ERP. But to your points, yes, and will it set up even recommendations for long-term, elements that we should look at additional funding or other things if we don't get it perfectly right on the first swing, what are the additional things we can look at? But it will, I think, help with that dialogue and discussion and looking at that. And again, I go back to there's always a yearly budget that we can make requests of the city. And then, in some ways, not that we're focusing on the funding mechanism right now, but knowing that there's the in 2025, the first tax expires, but there's also the second tax in 2034 that would expire. And so I think it's setting ourselves up for those long-term visions and what are the things we should be looking at and monitoring, that this isn't, you just have to get it perfect today. I go back to the efforts of the pioneers. Justin pointed them out 30 some years ago when they were struggling. Well, what's the right size? What land should we acquire? How much is it going to cost? How much do we ask? There wasn't a singular perfect answer to that. Obviously, they did really well in selling the voters and getting the support for it. And it is a magnificent thing, as Justin pointed out earlier, where we've gotten to today. That's kind of a similar process that we're in. And I just want to help reassure everyone that, again, whether we make this a little higher, a little lower, whatever that is, this is still a significant step towards the concern of long-term management and protection of the preserve. And I think it showed great foresight on the commission 5-6 years ago to start this process. And it's a policy discussion, and it's in the governmental process. So it's not always pretty, but we'll work our way through that. And again, we've had a lot of input. And you're getting a lot of numbers put on you, but you asked for it. You wanted the numbers filled in. So we're bringing them at you.
Thank you.
And then Commissioner Coluccio, this is Justin again. Scott hit the nail on the head, so I just wanted to refine it a little bit more. Is the ERP is a great product. It doesn't need to be changed. It's very broad. It says we need to do things. Now that we know things, we can put in it what we need to do instead of just saying we need to do. So I think it's going to be an amazing opportunity because I know that I've advocated before how the interconnectedness between all of these items is so enormous. And I know we are not talking about one at this point in time, but if I can tell you that both parts of 2B inform one, when we look at if we can get more into the scientific research and ecological resource plan and discover the areas that are most environmentally critical and crucial within the preserve, that informs land acquisition. So one of the things that you probably noticed, I know one of the commissioners brought up when Tiffany presented on the mule deer study, the 2 parcels of state trust land that are north and west of Legend Trail. Because there's urbanization between those 2 parcels, there was no wildlife connectivity. So if someday this commission is faced with the land acquisition question of, do we need to finish the entire recommended study boundary, which doesn't seem as possible with real estate, the research will be able to inform, okay, we can't get it all, but of the area that's left, what is the most ecologically sensitive so we can prioritize that? So there's one thing that I know we've talked about the breakout, but what this could do for helping the preserve overall and all the interconnectedness of everything that it's going to be tasked with is enormous.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Commissioner Coluccio. Commissioner Olson, you had a question?
I think Croy might have just been close to answering the question. And I'm trying to set my own mind straight here because I guess I'm fighting for dollars because I feel like this is a pretty significant. If we're going to put this out to the voters to vote for a dollar number to cover a budget, and then the next year decide that we get an ERP plan and we really need $400,000 instead of $200,000. Would we wait till 2034? Wait 9 or 10 years to be able to ask the voters again for money? But you mentioned available funds. And I don't know if that's the general fund or whatever that is, but how realistic is it that a year from now we could come back and ask for another $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000?
Well, I'll probably let Bill add to this since he's more experienced at that even than I. But I think there's always that opportunity, and it's going to depend upon where the economy is and how tight dollars are and things like that. But that would be true in any situation that we face. But I think if we are able to, with fact-based science and information supporting us, go and say, oh, yep, we'd like to add this category or that category or whatever that might be. That's the type of evidence that does very well in going forward with recommendations. So that would be the justification for that in being able to present that. Plus, like I said, there's some flexibility that some of this could move a little bit from one area to the other. And as you're going to see in the next round, some of these areas of the invasives and restoration and the mapping and monitoring, et cetera, have some support back to research in some of these areas as well. So there's interrelationships above and beyond this. So we may be saying we've got a category of $200,000 to $250,000, but there's also other research that's going to be occurring in some of these areas as well. So it's not singularly limited to that. But Bill, you can tag on.
So Commissioner Olson and other commissioners, each year we put together outside of our budget decision packages. We weigh those out from each division and take them forward to the city manager, and they are included as a consideration to the council. So that's not unusual that we could ask for some additional dollars here to do an ERP, and that may be a request that we can ask for now. And we can run it through the process and see how that goes. The other opportunity we do have is that we do apply for the Indian Gaming Grant dollars. And so there might be some opportunity there. Because again, from that perspective, when we write those grants, that would be something that the Indian community would have some interest in. And so those are some things that I think we could certainly look at now. And I've talked to Scott and to Croy on a couple of these things right now that may be a strategy that we use this year. And so we'll just see how things play out. But, we get a lot of requests from everyone. So it's just a matter of how we can prioritize that.
I think I'd also just add that I think Commissioner Olson, you may have asked about our wish list, and in some ways this is getting towards that. And I think there are opportunities that as we put these together, and as Bill said, whether it's the gaming grants or other things that we can go after to expand that, but we'll be able to build on this, and those opportunities in a yearly request quite often are best for a one-time support. But if there is a good logic for a multi-year, we could look at adding that. I don't mean to diminish your desire at all to have the best answer today. But I do think there'll be other opportunities if we're able to show the logic and the science and the passion for it, and the opportunity of getting something in front of the council here, be it December, January, and hearing their feedback. And then we'll regather after that, and we can fine tune and refine this. There's nothing to say that it has to be absolute one way or the other. I think we want to be realistic that we don't go so high that you wouldn't. I mean, there's a political reality of asking folks for more tax dollars, and I think we have to be realistic in that. But that I don't want to throw cold water on it, and just that's always a reality that you can go too far and get the whole thing shot down.
I hope at the $2 million mark on a $2 billion acquisition, we're not shooting too far. I'm hoping the taxpayers, or I believe the taxpayers, are going to recognize there's some amount of money that needs to be spent to support and maintain their acquisition.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vice City Manager. We appreciate your time, and obviously also to Croy. Are we ready to move on to D?
And I had C in here as well, just real quick. And this is just
Yes, sorry.
And so this is a presentation we did in the spring, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I can come back to it. I know, I think it's more important to get to the others, but this is the corridors, and there's really two key areas where we have streets that cross the preserve. I think you're all very familiar with 128th Street based on recent discussions, and then also Dynamite. I know that came up as well. And this is just to show you 6 years ago, or a little over 6 years ago, the commission at that time, it's very hard to read that, but basically the commission wanted to be sure that in our preserve improvement projections at that time, that we included the wildlife crossing, and the number is $2 million at that time. So just historically, the commission had asked for that to be put into these projections at that time. And so we took a quick look at the Dynamite corridor, and a very cursory look. This is not the final aspect, but we asked our capital improvement projects folks to take a look at a theoretical land bridge. And this is just west of 128th Street on Rio Verde. You may remember that there's a small hill to the north side of Rio Verde at that point. And Scott had some discussions with Game and Fish, and they thought this was a logical point to at least talk about. We would do much greater studies to assure that this really is right or not. But what you have on the north side is a high point that we could more easily take a high bridge and connect, add soil, and create a natural crossing, so to speak, over the roadway. You can see it's got a width of 200 feet long and a length of 120 feet. And so that's basically a bridge structure that our capital improvement project folks estimated the cost of, with a 14-foot clear span, the structure necessary to support soil and vegetation on top of that, identifying drainage channels being managed around there. And don't worry about whether that many lanes or everything would be built. We just wanted to overbuild. We wanted to build it big enough so that whatever was in there, we didn't have to change it later. It could remain as is. We tie into the hillside on the north side, the channelization, relocating. We've got overhead power lines on the south side. And then the top of the bridge having soil native plant material. They priced that out for us. And that's at a minimum, it's in the $10 million range. I've actually just sent this back to our capital projects folks because the last 6 months haven't been kind to estimating. And I suspect this number is going to be higher. And I'm not going to speculate tonight, but I may be back in a week or two and give you a slightly revised number. There would be additional things, the environmental assessment, the location and size. There's also potential of potentially some people participating in this. And I think it was Commissioner Hackbarth provided us something, an example from California, that there was interest in the citizenry of participating in that. But there may also be, if this were a regional roadway designation, there could be regional transit funds that could become available. All very speculative right now, but this was the number that we used to put into the chart. We'll also do a little bit more work. We've talked about 128th Street and minimizing that, moving it to an emergency corridor. There could still be some minor things we would do, but we think the cost would be remarkably lower than a $10 million number in that. And so that was really where we'd identified then that $10 million number. And then the opportunities for matching would be evaluated and determined. There would be transportation dollars certainly involved in road improvements and other things. And can we get drainage funding and other things to help with that? So we would look at a whole host of ways of trying to get supporting dollars around that. But when we met with the commission last, the target was agreed at roughly this $10 million for the time being as a placeholder. Again, that's an area where in the future, that's a one-time, could there be out of general fund, or could there be a separate bond project request if we wanted to? Those are some of the things we could look at as well. So again, you can think about it over the next week or two. And if you have more questions, I'm happy to come back at it. But we feel very good that 10 million is a reasonable target, but it could easily go much higher depending on what you add to it. Happy to answer any quick questions on that.
Thank you for that, Croy. And I know we also talked about, this is all research down the road, but also talked about possibly going under, using a wash as a natural crossing, not to open that can.
You'd still have the structural costs. So
Sure,
one way or
of
the
course.
other,
Understood.
whether you're a little up or down, that
Understood.
can all be managed.
Yep.
As
That's
appropriate.
terrific. Okay, great. Any questions on this, or shall we move on to D?
Just
One question.
a
Okay.
quick question, Croy. You mentioned the 128th, the corridor that we've had a lot of discussion about. I'm not up to date. What is the current status of that?
I
Is that something
knew
you
that
can-
was going to come up, and I didn't get a chance to visit with transportation ahead of. They certainly are working through their process, and as we said, we'd be working on getting a follow-up discussion on that. And so whether that's one of the November meetings, I just hadn't gotten that targeted into a date yet. But
Thank you.
I'll try and have that for you next week. Fair.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Commissioner Coluccio?
Yeah, say, Croy, so with the wildlife crossing, at one point in time, at least I mentioned the possibility or the issue of potentially having a safety crosswalk, in that area for visitors who are crossing from north of Dynamite to south of Dynamite. And I know that we wouldn't want that crossing to be in conjunction or on top of the wildlife crossing. But is there a way to include that along with this as part of the entire project?
Absolutely, there would be. Our hope or my sense would be to certainly work with transportation to identify that as a transportation funded aspect of the overall program. But there are drainage issues out there, and sometimes we're able to co-locate drainage and trail crossings and things like that. You're right. You would not want the trail on the wildlife portion of the crossing. So that way too speculative is to say exactly what that would be, but that would absolutely be part of that future. So whether roadway widening comes first or enhancement comes first or whatever, those would be things that would be looked at that time.
All right, thank you.
Okay, let's move on to item 2D.
All right, so into the invasive plants and restoration, the invasive speaks to the mitigation of fuels, minimizing the threat of wildland fire and long-term needs to restore the past or future disturbances. Invasives is about really the removal of the invasives. And so this is an area where this is moving. We've been doing research, working with the Conservancy on this, and that will continue to go forward in various ways. But this is starting to move it from that identification of ideas into the action, and with the initial focus on the buffalo and fountain grasses, but there are other species that will absolutely be included. We will be looking in many ways at use of contractors for some of the heavy work, much as we do with trails, maybe similar in that, but some of these are very remote locations or large areas that are going to exceed the ability of asking volunteers alone or staff and volunteers to do it. And so the targeting of that, where there's the removal potentially of the plant there, in the research, there's different chemical treatments that are targeted with that. And then there's follow-up. In most cases, the invasives are not gone simply because we treat it once. It can be a treatment, multi-year type of process that kind of layers out over time, and is something that we would want to be looking at. And again, we would be using contractors, we'd be using volunteers, we'd be using staff in various manners, much as we do with after a rainstorm, have we had trail damage, or a saguaro after a windstorm fall on a trail. There'd be opportunities in many areas here. There's opportunities already use of certain volunteers that are assisting us and are trained in chemical treatment, and the city support of paying for their registrations, for their education, for being certified. There's any number of different things that are included this. And in essence, we're really targeting, and this gets to the specificity, we're really trying to target a range of 5 to 200 acres a year. That number may change. We're still working on getting some feedback from other contractors and such that do this type of work. When you're doing the work near a trailhead or near a roadway, you don't have as much challenge of getting into it or delivering water if you're doing chemical treatment or hauling out of material being removed. If it's up on the side of Browns Mountain or back in the Courts Trail, then it's a different issue. You've got a longer haul. You've got the hiking in, the hiking out, the material, bringing water in, bringing materials out. All of those things are, so the number is going to vary a lot. And so we're working on identifying a set of ranges, but this is the initial targeting, and we're projecting the yearly cost on the 150 to 200,000 range with this proposal. And again, this is an area where an opportunity came up this past summer. We only had 3 days to get an application in, and the fire department went after it. They were not successful this past year, but we're all now aware that we'll be ready next year. And there may be multiple applications because there are things outside the preserve that the fire department absolutely cares about and that affect us as well, but there are things within. And so we know we have, with the work that has been done, the mapping and the efforts that have already been going on with the efforts with the Conservancy and the staff, we're well positioned to be prepared for that. And Scott and I met with some contractors who deal with agencies across the country. And the base proposal that we're putting together here, they don't find many land management agencies being this comprehensive, holistic, programmatic. They're generally reacting, and they're generally doing it on a one-time basis. We're looking at the point of this being at a yearly cost, that we're able to put this into a repetitive program that stays after that. And that if we get recurrence in a particular area, we're able to come back at it and treat that. So that is, again, the very general program that we're putting here. Scott, anything you wanted to add at this point, or Justin or Bill, anything, or we're good?
I know I can just add on this because this has come up from some of our stewards, of that the Conservancy is very supportive of this concept. So the question has come up sometimes in conversations when the city says, bring in contractors to do this, is that displacing the work the Conservancy is doing? And I want to clarify, it is not. So the way that the Conservancy is viewing this strategy for the next 25 to 30 years is that our scientists and stewards are the ones that are researching and monitoring and doing spot removals. But when it comes to these mass removals, it's just like our construction and maintenance crews can come in and take amazing care of the trails, except after a giant storm that washes out an entire trail system. We bring in ACE to do that. So our stewards would still be treating spot treating invasive plants. So if we see a beginning of an area versus like the quartz wash that is so huge that our folks just don't have the capacity to do it. So I wanted to clarify that just for everyone, because some people have asked, is this trying to displace the work the Conservancy is doing? And it is absolutely not. I just also know, as to Croy's point, asking volunteers to work from sunset to sundown for 3 weeks straight on removals just isn't sustainable. Where a youth corps, it is very sustainable to come in and pull all of that. So I wanted to clarify that piece to know that we are fully supportive of this concept. But Croy pointed out something perfectly, as throughout the rest of this document, we've talked about baseline. This covers buffalo grass and fountain grass, the species that we're working on. We can certainly, when we come back and do the deeper dive, talk about any other species we want to look at, but we're still sensitive to, we want to be able to continue to do the work we're doing that is very great work, but we always have opportunity to be better.
Wonderful. Thank you. Any questions on? Yes, Commissioner Olson.
All the rains lately have made the fountain grass bloom everywhere, and it's real easy to spot now. And as I drive around town, I see it, in lots and lots of places, especially malls or stores, grocery stores and stuff like that, where it's been used. I believe I understand it's been outlawed, or I don't know what the right word to use, for new planting, but is there anything we can do in the surrounding areas of the preserve to minimize fountain grass that is existing on not non-preserved property?
Yes, there are things, some of it's going to require, because so much of it is well beyond the preserve.
Oh, totally. This is out of bounds for.
So,
yeah.
And again, just because of agenda and things, if you got a quick.
Oh yeah, I've got very briefly, I can, this is Justin, I can answer your question. Arizona finally added it to the noxious weeds list 2 years ago. We've been advocating it for over 20 years. Nevada did it 25 years ago. So it is now a noxious weed. So it is technically, you can't sell it, but it goes back to this what we were just talking about. 2 years ago, we got a Department of Forestry and Fire Management grant because of our partnership with the city, that our partnership bill authorized us to be able to distribute at trailheads and potentially libraries, where they funded a grant where we purchased a bunch of native plants from a nursery. And the fire department said that they would be happy to canvass the neighborhoods the next time we get it, because they weren't aware of it, through all the neighborhoods surrounding the preserve. If a homeowner removed that non-native plant, that fountain grass, brought us a picture of the removal, we would give them a free replacement native plant. And DFFM absolutely loved the idea. Chief Shannon from the fire department said they'll be behind it wholeheartedly if we can get that program back. So there are some projects that we can get thanks to the partnership with the city.
But that's beyond the scope of really what we're targeting here with this, but there are other visions then beyond that that really are more citywide that aren't preserve focused as what these are.
Yeah, and I didn't know, I don't know how far we can go, but I mean, is that something we could make a recommendation to the city council on because of the preserve issue that we deal with, but I wouldn't know what recommendation to make. And it sounds like there's pretty decent traction on.
And I think there will be, well, unfortunately, there's a long history of fountain grass already in the valley and established that I'm sure they will be talking about it 50 years from now, still working on managing the issue.
And we will still be removing it from the preserve.
I won't be talking about it, but there will be others and that's unfortunate. But what we're really focused on with this effort is that gets into the preserve. We will continue to have discussions and the fire department will be coming and they've got efforts on that broader sense. And this, I don't mean to single them out, but it is certainly something that contributes to their concerns of fire, not just in the preserve, but in the other areas where we have natural areas extensively in Scottsdale. These are the things that we want to deal with, and community services and others. It will be the problem is it's not just a citywide, it's a valley-wide issue that has to be addressed. And so it's not really, I don't want to spend too much time. It's not the agenda item, but we can bring that back for further discussion.
Thank you for clarifying, Croy. Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Any other questions? If not, we will move on to, we have given direction throughout this, so I don't know that we need to bullet point. I'm sure that you've written all that down. I certainly got written down as well, the archaeology aspect that Mark had mentioned. So thank you for that.
Yep, I made that note.
All right, we'll move on. Yes.
I'll move into restoration. And again, this is a little bit different in that, and again, this is just our approach, and we could address it slightly differently, but the proposal here is to look at a focused, and I'm saying it's a 5 to 10 year effort that would address the known areas of previous disturbance or those that have recently occurred. Fortunately, there's not as much of that. Most of it's historical. And so there, we're putting this more as a one-time cost. And again, very similar to what we just talked about, the use of contractors, volunteers, staff. A lot of it depends upon the scale of what we're dealing with. And scale speaks to a multitude of things: distance from access roads or access to water, access to power. If we're using irrigation and want timers to be part of it, irrigation control timers and things of that nature influence that. The magnitude of the damage. In some areas, it may be more of surface scarring. In other areas, it may be but erosion and elements of other damage that have occurred in a particular area. And that's the amount of grading. And Scott likes to call it Fountain Grass Hill. It's the old Quartz Hilltop there, just northeast of the Pima Dynamite Trailhead, and very heavily scarred. It was mined, and that will require not a volunteer effort, but a substantial construction effort to do some grading work to it, to establish revegetation in there, versus some areas may be much more. Many of the old trails that have been reclaimed have a much lighter touch, and where they are scarified and there may be a seed mix applied, and we let nature run its course. Maybe we come back in after 2, 5, 10 years and evaluate that and do some additional work. But this is really targeting up to 200 acres or in that range of 200 acres. And some of this may cost as little as 1,000 an acre. Some of it may be 50,000. There may be some that exceed that. This is not trying to anticipate if a major event happens 5, 10, 50 years from now. That would be something much more that would be a bond project or a separate call for funding. This is really targeting those things that we know we have disturbance areas, many of them old roads or old trails or scars next to roadways. and is the area that we're looking to target. And so the number that we have in this is this $2 to $4 million range, and putting it in the one-time costs and opportunities of some of those. Some of that could fall within the existing preserve tax. We don't need to talk about that today, but that's one of the ideas, is that we could target that. But we could look at this as a yearly, but we were really looking to make sure that we accelerated this and get after this because we think it is manageable in I'll call it a relatively short time frame. Much as we've built a lot of trails and trailheads in the last 20 years, we think we can go after these areas and get restoration underway in a number of those areas, building on research work and other things that have been done and a whole host of experience that we have out there. So that's the quick presentation on the restoration costs.
Any questions on that? No? Commissioner Olson?
Commissioner Olson here. Croy, if it's a one-time cost, is that an annual number and it would be within 1 year? Or because, as you said, restoration, you come back 5 years later and see how that worked and try some more and do some more. I mean, I'm trying to understand how one time would work.
The target is up to $4 million to treat the entire 200-acre average or approximation there. That it's a one-time. Now, it may get spent over 10 years or 15 years, but you'd have the ability to start going after that, and we'd prioritize and be strategic. We wouldn't do it all in 1 year, but we'd do it over a period of 5 to 10 years and sequence that out and get that work done.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that explanation. Good question. Anything else? Anything else on 2D? 6D, I'm sorry.
Chair Winstrom, this is Justin from the Conservancy. I'm just pointing this out because I would have submitted a public comment if I didn't know I would be here. But we had clarified, just to support what Croy had said, that, and the Conservancy asked the question, our stewards asked the question, so we presented it. If there was a catastrophic need for restoration, that is not what we're anticipating. If there was a wildfire, if there was something, the city said that they will find resources to support that. So I wanted that to be topical because that was very topical within our organization.
Thank you. That is good clarification. Thank you for that, Justin. Okay, let's move on. Item number 7, staff reports.
Yeah, and so this, oh no.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I beg your
we
pardon.
got 3 more boxes.
I'm sorry.
I'll
Excuse
go
me.
quickly.
You're right. I'm looking at the wrong, I should be looking over here. Sorry.
That's all right. So this is the mapping, monitoring, and assessment of progress. And this really applies to a number of both the wildland fire and the last 2 invasives and restoration. And again, this is recognizing that what we've identified is on average roughly $500,000 a year of projects and things that would be going on. What we're going to want to be able to do for the citizens that voted for this and really any of us, we're going to want to know, what is our progress? Are we keeping track of it? Are we mapping it? And so, and this is where the eyes, I don't know if it's much of the ears, but certainly the eyes of the volunteers and the staff will have a certain level of support to this. But also looking at the assessment of the work done, and is it holding up? Is it needing to be redone? And so this goes after a number of different things, and to where we have matching grant opportunities, they're going to require some level of this to occur, and in some cases quite extensive aspects. So we identified these costs, and we could have merged this in with those, but we felt this, and really the next one as well, that's going to be the staff administration side of this, that it was important to show that we're targeting dollars for action, but to support that, we need to be tracking and assuring that we're doing quality work and that we're getting the results that, be it the research identified or that our goals identified, regardless, but that all of these categories would be tracking. And so that's targeting 100 to 125,000 a year. As I said, in the matching grant opportunities, they require this type of work to be done, and it can be quite extensive and going down to billing statements and things like that. So we have to have that type of tracking and being able to do the mapping and identify the acreage completed, the level of work that's been done, all of those things that are included in that. And so that's where we added that into this category that fits the entire 2D area and supports that in addition to the action dollars, I'll call them, that are on the other side.
Excellent. Questions?
So there's some research, there's some monitoring, there's a number
Absolutely.
of things that start showing up in some of this as well, just to clarify on that. If none others, I will jump into the final two categories. And so under the additional, under the daily preserve operations and maintenance, two more things. Additional staff management and administration of, in particular, categories 2D and 2F, but it could also include some of the work on trails or trailheads. And so that's all the invasives, it's the cultural master plan work that's been presented before, and all these matching grant proposals. And so now when you add all that up, that's $1 million a year that we've added into the proposed activity. And some of that may come from matching grants, some of that may come from other partnerships, but we need to have the number of projects, and many of these will be smaller, multiple projects in a year, and having the staff resources to help prioritize that, help assure that if we're doing contractor work, we have them appropriately procured and monitored. So all of the project development and management would be included in that, assisting ourselves, this collective group, the council, the Conservancy, with our strategies and prioritization, so that the types of things that we'd be bringing back to you on a yearly basis of what we recommend to do in a budgeting standpoint. The matching grant audits, quite often you do the documentation, but you may get audited and have to provide that documentation, and the direct management of contractors, volunteers, and staff is all rolled up into a projected $200,000 to manage that $1 million of activity. And so that's above and beyond the 900,000 that we talked about earlier on up in this area. So we were adding that into this because these, as we were going through this, and again, we could have put that into those other categories. This was just a matter, we felt, of being more transparent about where these costs were coming. We could have averaged both the monitoring, mapping, and the staff administration of that into those other numbers. We felt this was a more accurate way of explaining that, but we can always change how we share that information. So that's that category. And I have one more.
I think that is more accurate, though, as far as helping us to understand that that is operations and maintenance.
And it's consistent with how this was already laying out. So as we were going through this in the last few months, we're like, yeah, we got to have somebody, you know, because no offense, but Scott can do a lot of things and others as well, but we don't have enough staff right now, and there would be a need to add to that.
Thank you.
And then the last one here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go right ahead.
Commissioner
Sorry about
Coluccio.
that. You know, anyway, so if you, could you go back one slide, please? There. So the $1 million in cost projections, where is that captured on this spreadsheet? So where is it captured on the spreadsheet?
Well, those are the invasives, the
That
wildland
stuff,
fire, the restoration, the cultural, and what we haven't gotten to, but what we'll expect is some of the trailheads. And not that that will be nearly as big as what it has been in the past, but then additionally, the potential for the matching grants. And that's, that says including, not matching grants additional, but we could easily see a program numbers on a yearly basis at $1 million and greater.
And so what you're saying is that the cost of managing all those projects is $200,000 or thereabouts.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. The projection. So there's a whole, some of that starts adding into all those categories that Scott and Bill went through earlier. It's not just the cost of the staff person, there's benefits and all the other things that support that. And so this last one, the best for last, is that the right way to support this? The volunteer, adding volunteer management, administration, and support for all of these efforts that we've really been talking about. So very similar in some ways to the staff support, but there's really an acknowledgement that with the continued and growing benefits of coordinated management between the city and the volunteers, supports all these projects. And things as what may seem mundane as having the city volunteers in clothing, the blue shirts. The city has supported that in the past, but supporting that in the future so that people understand that those volunteers are related to the city of Scottsdale. The direct support of education programs, some of the things we mentioned before. There are training programs that go on a regular basis, and some are directly run by the city, some are run by the chemical treatment is done by the state of Arizona. The training associated with that, the support of technology, many of the things that we're talking about, we're already doing some of that. And I'm not the expert on this, Scott can chime in, but the GIS support and having the ability that every steward can utilize their cell phone to help track where their patrol route was or where they document having identified a noxious weed or whatever it might be. Those are all things so that those all relate back to our GIS system, and that the Conservancy or the other volunteer agency might be involved doesn't have to create their own technology, but rather the city's technology can be tied into that. Those are all costs that we've been learning about in the past several years, and we've been picking up on that. But with the growth of these programs that we're identifying here, we see all of these things, and then the general support, things that we've already been doing, things that will enhance, but the cost of programs, programming, the recognition efforts, all of that. And we have a lot of people that can talk about what some of these things are, but it's really this wide range of things that we're looking at a projected cost of that $125,000 to $150,000 and tying that in there. And you can all read it on your sheet. What we really wanted to emphasize is that the value of the volunteers, the benefits of that is something that exceeds what I've got on that sheet. I think one of the past years it hit $1.65 million, the value of the volunteer efforts to that. And so this is really looking at some of that administrative support from the city to volunteers that end up benefiting the city of Scottsdale and having roughly less than 10% of that value being supported in, be it the technology, be it in the education, the training, the registration, whatever that might be. And I'm happy to let anyone else chime in if I missed anything, but also turn it over for questions. So that completes all the boxes, other than two more yet to come. But that was really one of our goals, was to get you as much of this, and it really fulfills filling in the yearly costs and those kind of recurring non-annual costs, but gives you a sense. And that was part of our goal tonight, get you that, let you have some time to think about it. You've already fired some great questions at us, and we can come back and in the next meeting or the meetings in November, provide some of the detail that we've talked about.
Thank you. Very comprehensive, very helpful. Questions? Commissioner Olson.
Regarding the follow-up on some of this, when are we expecting to send a budget recommendation to the city council?
It could be as early as the presentation in December to them.
So if we're to do any deep dives into any of these, it needs to be done
The next three meetings.
in the next 3 meetings. Okay. I don't know about other people, but I'm very interested in some deeper dives in some of those. The education, I'd love to hear what kind of a plan is out there. in, how we're aligned to that. Research, the same thing. Well, not the same thing on that, but research, I'd like to know a little bit more about what has the Conservancy been doing, and what of that are we going to continue doing, or what is going to be added to it based on this sort of a budget, just to get an idea. Those are probably my more significant ones that I'm interested in. I don't know about other people.
Anything else that someone, yes, Commissioner Coluccio.
Yeah, so getting back to the $125,000 to $150,000, is that above and beyond what we're currently using to support the Conservancy's volunteer efforts?
I think that.
Yes, Chair Wenstrom, Commissioner Coluccio, it's generally been in about the 40,000 to 50,000 range, except for the glitches that we ran into with COVID.
Okay, so I guess my next question is for Justin. Are you happy with that amount?
It's basically the same. No, it's the same that we articulated with the rest of the items. That is the baseline, the minimum that we would be able to show to continue doing what we're doing now. So could we do more? Could we have a more robust recognition program for the volunteers if there was a higher investment? Yes. Could we have better technology? Yes, those are, but we really came to this to say, we do a great job now. We'd love to do a better job. We do a really good job. So this was the level to get us to cover the work we're doing now. That wouldn't make us dependent on private donations to support the volunteers, to support the preserve. We would still do that work for all of our work outside of the preserve, but these numbers aligned with all of them to continue to support our work in the preserve.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Commissioner Olson.
On those same lines, the $200,000 for the management resources for the projects. First off, let me say I'm excited to see this. I think it's great because I think the Conservancy has been trying to manage those projects, and I think it'd be better to come from a city resource. My question is, what are we talking? Are we talking one person, two people, three, four? What do we have an idea of what we're talking about in that 200K?
It's a great question, and what we're thinking is, it may not be a singular, there will certainly be an ad of at least a person or whatever, but we may spread some of that responsibility amongst the existing staff as well. And so you may see a coordinator in the South area managing some of the projects in that area. So that would be developed in more detail as we have certainty of what the funding is and how we spread that. But those aren't final decisions, but there's clearly, to Scott's earlier numbers of the 4.8 positions in that, we would be increasing that number, and whether that's by 1 or 1.5 or whatever, that's yet to be determined. And are we generalizing people, some that have that and some that don't? That would have to be looked at. But we know that there's a need to have the actual administration part occurring, and how that's assigned would be determined as with anything by the skill set and the management responsibilities of the organization.
Okay.
And I can say, I want to give Bill and Croy and Scott credit where they deserve it. The assistance we've gotten from community services, if I know some of this number is to help support not just the person that could do this, but I just know the Conservancy is grateful for the work that Anne has done in supporting some of our graphic work, Melee and the IT department, and supporting the conversion over to GIS. So I can attest to the work that some of the other departments have done, that it'd be great to make sure we have that support in the future. Especially the GIS IT, because that is a beast.
Excellent. My closing thought on that topic, this general topic here, would just be that when I look at a high end of our range here at, we'll call it 2 million, and for a $2 billion asset, wow, it's pretty lean on maintenance and stuff. It's remarkable that we can do it for that price. So,
and again, I'll reiterate,
it's just, I understand it's a
broken
baseline.
record.
I understand.
We would fully expect that we would be getting a lot more partnerships and matching things occurring with this, but I don't want to promise what that is. I have a full belief. I mean, the work that has gone on the past 10 years, the amount of dollars that have come in beyond the city is really quite phenomenal. And to think that that wouldn't occur in my mind just isn't reasonable. I think it will. And I think by, Justin certainly advocated this, that by having the certainty of some dollars helps leverage even more. And it might be quite his exact words, but and not just with volunteers and Conservancy, but with other organizations. We think that there's a lot of room for growth in that.
Wonderful.
And
Thank
I
you.
can clarify based on what Croy just said. A lot of these grantors don't want to support seed funding or existing costs. They really want the projects. So if we can cover our baseline costs in some of this stuff, it opens up the opportunity to go out for so much more. Our funder that funded the Mule Deer project gave the perfect example when we went back to them and said, would you be interested in another project? And they said, absolutely. If the city and the preserve has the infrastructure in place with the Conservancy to cover the administration of the research program, we'll give you another 100,000. But until you can get that covered, we're not going to come to the table. And then the other thing that I did want to just clarify, because this did come up from a couple of our stewards, as I said at the beginning, we're advocating for the care of the preserve in a position for whomever, whether it's us, whether it's whoever the contractor. But I also wanted to articulate, because it came up in our last steward conversation, that if the Conservancy was honored enough to be able to do some of this work, even at the high end of all of these numbers on here, it is less than 25% of our organization's work. So that's where we're struggling, is we're getting so much support to do things away. If we could get this work, which, like I said, is a little bit less than 20% of what we work with annually, it could allow us to dedicate those resources that could be unwavering, or whomever the volunteer support organization is.
Well stated. Thank you, Justin. Okay, moving on. Item number 7, staff reports.
I will be brief.
Thank you, sir.
October 31st, we have the Camino Campana dedication at 10:30. We just finalized the invitation. I will send that out to the commission tomorrow. We're really looking forward to that dedication. And then November 13th at 9 a.m. is the dedication at Pima Dynamite Trailhead. We are right now wrapping up. We are in the final stretch of finishing the trailhead. We have the fire department inspection tomorrow. We're hoping for certificate of occupancy soon. We still have some other things to touch up before we can formally open the restrooms and the building to the public. But that will be happening in the next couple of weeks. Related to Pima Dynamite, I did hand out in your packets the new green map. That is the new print version of the map for the north area. Looks very similar to the prior version, except for that Pima Dynamite area. We filled in the trailhead and a lot of the trail connections that go right to the trailhead. And then starting tomorrow, we're going to be installing the directional signs at those new junctions in the Pima Dynamite area. So we are getting very close to being finalized, and we will send more details out on those two events to the commission. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Terrific. That's wonderful. My only question to you, Scott, is did you receive the email you requested of me?
I did.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions? Okay, we're sailing along here. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I missed that. Commissioner Lips?
We really can't present on that, but
I just wanted to make a comment on that. In terms of security in these parking lots, is there any possibility of maybe having cameras or something so that you can make it easier for the police to go after people like that? Oh, I'm sorry.
I think you would find that there's been a lot of cooperation between the preserve staff and the police department, and that there are things that go on that we don't always report on at the request of how they like to manage certain investigations, but there is an awful lot of that does go on. Scott, I don't know if there's anything else we.
Since it's not on the agenda, should
Yeah.
we bring
Yeah,
it
we can
back?
bring that back.
For further discussion?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know if this was the proper time to even.
But
bring
Scott and
it
his
up.
staff do an awful lot of work in coordination with them, and we do affect that quite a bit.
Okay, I'll have some comment when you bring this back.
Thank you,
Because I've
Commissioner
been
Lips. Thank
Hearing
you.
comments from people, from other stewards about that situation, so.
Thank you. Okay, we talked about item number 8. Anything else that you needed to add on that, Scott or Croy? Upcoming meeting dates, I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
was
at our
looking at staff.
next meeting,
Yeah.
we will have elements on the access area plan and the land acquisition. And I'm not sure how many of the questions raised tonight we'll have ready within a week, but if not, then sooner. or
Okay.
The next meeting. So
Thank you.
We'll do that as soon as we can get them.
Great. Commissioner comments and questions? Yes, Commissioner Coluccio.
Yeah, Commissioner Clucio. So I would just like to echo Marcia's comments or issue there with regard in particular to security cameras, and would like to know, as part of that future discussion, have we ever considered putting security cameras in the parking lots? And, if not, then should we be considering that, for the future? So.
It's a good question for future consideration. Thank you. Other questions? For future agendas, I would just add, I did speak with Croy about this earlier. We do have an opportunity perhaps of a naming project, and that I've asked to have that come up on our agenda in January. And we'll talk about it more at that time, but I just wanted to put that on public record. It's called a naming project. That's what yeah. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Commissioner Olson.
For Justin, how are we doing with the invasive plants? I know after the rains, there was quite the bloom. Are we under control?
I will need advisement from city staff if I am at liberty
Yeah.
to just mention that on this
You can
agenda
raise
item.
comments here and we can bring that back.
I don't think I can
But
respond.
it's not that's
Okay.
not an agendized item, but we can bring that back.
Okay, I had previously asked you, and you said you had a meeting with them. I'm interested in the results of that meeting.
Yep, that's fine. We can bring that to you.
Sure.
Thank you. Anything else? Commissioner comments? All right. Hearing none, I believe we are ready to ask for a motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Clucio would like to make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Thank you. And a second, please.
Commissioner Hackbarth seconds it.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. All right, and let's put that to a vote. And our Vice Chair, LaPat Palasco, has had to leave for a prior meeting, so she will not be voting. So let's move on to Commissioner Coluccio
Commissioner Clucio says yes.
and Commissioner Hackbarth,
Hackbarth says yes.
Commissioner Lips,
Commissioner Lips says yes.
Commissioner Olson,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith.
Yes.
Chair says yes. I believe we are finished at, it's like about 7:42. Thank you.